Chapter 1517. Yuhuan Heavens, Su Yang Heavens. Mystic light flashed, and the skyscraping spirit ship leaped out of the myriad emptiness ring. Zhang Yan stretched out his hand, and the letter that enlightened Master One gave him landed in his palm. He had already checked, and this item did not have the ability to chase across realms. However, once it reached the Xianhong Heavens or the heavens that were on good terms with it, it might be detected by them. With a turn of his mana, the item instantly turned into ashes, and the faintly discernible qi activity also disappeared completely. He looked around, and saw that there were spirit ships and cloud rafts flying out of the ring from time to time, and they were all heading in the same direction. This did not seem like a normal situation, so he asked, "Chu Zhao, has this realm always been this lively?" Chu Zhao also found it strange. He thought for a while, and seemed to remember something, and said, "Master, perhaps this is a coincidence of the 100 sects debate in this realm." He explained a little, and Zhang Yan then understood that this Su Yang Heavenly Lord's cultivation was extremely profound. In terms of mana alone, he was one of the top 19 Heavenly Lords. However, due to an accident, the sect he was in was destroyed. This enlightened master was indifferent, and he advocated doing nothing. He did not rebuild his sect, and usually only focused on cultivating and did not care about the outside world. However, it was also because of this that this realm was not like the other heaven realms, where one sect ruled the entire heaven. Instead, there were hundreds of sects of various sizes coexisting. However, as the number of forces increased, conflicts naturally increased, and this led to the prevalence of fighting in this realm. But other than a few sects, the rest of the sects were similar in strength, and their sects were very far away from each other, so no one could think of annexing the other. Therefore, every 100 years, there would be a debate to resolve the conflicts between the sections. Because it was convenient to travel between the Yuhuan Heavens, it also attracted many rogue cultivators from other realms to observe, and some were recruited into various sects to participate in the competition. If some were lucky, they would even be taken in as disciples by some almighty figures. As time passed, it became a grand gathering for cultivators of the younger generation to reveal their brilliance. Every single time, a large number of independent cultivators or cultivators that had lost their inheritance would come here with the hope that they would be chosen by a great figure and ascend into the heavens in a single bound. When Zhang Yan's carriage arrived, it drew the attention of those outside. The sky-split carriage was incomparably enormous, and the vital energy it revealed was vast and profound, causing even the world ring to tremble endlessly because of it. With a single glance, it was obvious that a great divinity had arrived. Even though the Middle Heaven Road was passable and the speed of the skyscraping magic boat was neither fast nor slow, many cultivators still took the initiative to move aside to show their respect. The cultivator guarding the realm ring didn't dare to be negligent. Because of the spell conference, there was a Grotto Heaven cultivator who came to watch over the realm ring. He could naturally tell that the person who came was a cultivator who had cultivated the root fruit. He immediately came out to welcome him and bowed. "I'm Chen Bian, I've seen you before. How should I address you? What brings you to my realm?" In the past, when a great figure like this came from other realms, they would usually inform their realm in advance to avoid unnecessary misunderstandings. However, there would occasionally be cultivators from other realms that came, so it was impossible to know in advance. Moreover, Zhang Yan's vital energy was obscure and deep, so it was difficult to tell where he came from. It should be known that there were also demonic cultivators in the Yuhuan Heavens, and there was no lack of eccentric people among them, so he was very careful when speaking. After a while, he heard a voice by his ear. "I came to your realm this time to pay a visit to a fellow Taoist. I won't be staying in this realm for long." When Chen Bian heard this, his heart relaxed slightly. It seemed that this great figure didn't need to use words to conceal what he wanted to do. It seemed that he really came to pay a visit. At this moment, he thought of something else. Could it be that this person was invited by a sect to help? In this spell conference, this sect's reputation would definitely increase by a lot, so he had to find a way to find out. Thus, he bowed again and said, "Please forgive me for being rude, but may I ask, which sect are you really going to pay a visit to? If it's someone you know, I can lead the way for you." Zhang Yan thought for a while. If someone from this realm led the way, it would save more trouble, so he said, I want to go to Tamba sect this time, is it convenient for Taoist friend? Chen Bian came to a realization and thought, so it's an esteemed guest from Tanbua sect. At the same time, he was also relieved. Tanbua sect was one of the few powerful sects among the 100 clans, especially the founder, Taoist Sun Yu, whose cultivation was unfathomable. Even Green Jade Palace treated them with respect. However, there were few disciples in this sect and they didn't like to be ostentatious. During the spell conference, they usually only went through the motions and never fought with other sects, so they weren't a threat to Feng Shou Yard. He said, my Feng Shou Yard and Tanbua sect usually have dealings, but this sect is located in a small realm of the same Taoist realm, and it's extremely difficult for people who don't know the way to enter. Luckily, my sect has a teleportation formation door gifted by the sect leader of Tanbua sect, which can lead to that place. Why don't you wait for a while and wait for me to send a message to order someone to set up the formation door, then it won't be difficult to get to that place. Zhang Yan thought for a while and said, that's fine too, thank you for your trouble. Chen Bian said he didn't dare to do so. Facing a Taoist Sun Yu, he couldn't hope to get on good terms with him, nor could he offend him. He didn't dare to be negligent and immediately went to make arrangements. Not long after, a few Taoists came to set up the formation door. Their actions were extremely fast, and in just half a day, there was a spiritual light screen that climbed up from above. Then the Mo Kong spirit ship passed through it and disappeared in an instant. All the cultivators who saw this scene revealed expressions of envy and yearning. This was the power of a powerful cultivator. With such a realm, no matter where they went, everyone would treat them with respect. Even if they were enemies, they would have to put on a courteous appearance on the surface. Among the crowd, there was a young cultivator with slightly red eyes, and his gaze was especially scorching. He had cultivated for more than 500 years and achieved the Yuanying realm, but until now, he was still a lone cultivator. Even though he relied on some opportunities to reach his current realm, he didn't have the protection of a sect, the support of his peers, and the guidance of a master, so he had suffered a lot. He had always thought that if he could be placed under a large sect, his achievements would be far greater than what he had now. Today, he came to this supreme realm to find a good master. Perhaps this supreme true being is here to choose a disciple he likes. If I can defeat many opponents in the technique performance, perhaps I can become his disciple. There was far more than one person who had the same thought as him. There was even a rumor that a powerful being from beyond the heavens was coming to choose a disciple, and the person who obtained first place in the technique performance would receive the favor of this powerful being and become his disciple. Very quickly, this rumor became more and more intense, and it could not be stopped. After Chen Bian heard about this, he thought about it and did not take any methods to purposely eliminate it. Every time the technique performance was held, such news would spread, and he was already used to it. Perhaps this could even attract more geniuses here. As for whether or not this would cause the supreme true being to be displeased, there was no need to think too much about it, because that kind of powerful being would never care about what the lower generation cultivators thought. Coldly Small World was a vast expanse of blue waves. In the sky, there was a water curtain that covered tens of thousands of islands. In the middle of the land, tens of thousands of feet below the water, there was a cave made of jade. Inside sat a young Taoist who was calm and collected. He looked like a cool breeze and bright moon. This was the current sect master of the Tanbua sect, Guangtong, and one of the very few mortal metamorphosis cultivators in Suyang Sky. In the place where he was meditating, there was a pool of water about 3 feet in front of him. It was originally quiet, without any ripples, without any dirt, like a mirror that had existed since ancient times. However, suddenly, there were some ripples in the air, as if an invisible stone had entered it, and there was a clear, ding-dong sound. He opened his eyes and came out of meditation. After pondering for a moment, he called a boy in and said, "There will be an important guest coming over in the next few days. Tell Yan Qingzi to wait outside." Yan Qingzi was the eldest disciple of the sect, the candidate for the next sect master. After he heard the order from the sect master, a letter from the Fengshu courtyard arrived, and only then did he know that a mortal metamorphosis Shangzhen was coming to visit. He knew all the people who were friends with Guangtong, but he had never heard of this person. Even though he had some doubts, he still personally waited in front of the realm gate. Not long after, he suddenly felt a mysterious and profound aura descend. At the same time, his mind was in a trance. When he woke up, he found a young Taoist in a black robe standing in front of him. He actually didn't know when the other party arrived. He suppressed the surprise in his heart, bowed and said, "Tambua Sex Yen Qingzi greets Shang Zhen." Zhang Yan nodded in greeting and said, "No need to be so polite, Taoist." At this moment, a loud voice was heard, "Since Taoist has arrived, why don't you come in and have a chat?" Following the voice, a stream of water gushed out, accompanied by the sound of waves, all the way to his feet. Zhang Yan smiled faintly. He recognized the profundity of this technique. It was of the same origin as the Yutsong sect. He knew that the other party was using this to identify his identity. He took a step forward and rose above. He immediately used the water escape technique and followed the changes within. In a flash, he reached the end and arrived at a cave abode with rippling water. Guangtong's sect stood up from his seat, raised his hand and bowed. He said with a smile, "When I was sitting today, I suddenly felt ripples in the lake of my heart. I knew that a fellow Taoist of the same lineage had arrived. May I ask, which lineage are you from?" Zhang Yan returned the bow and said, "I am Zhang Yan, cultivating in Qinsong School. My sect was established by Taiming founding master." When Guangtong's sect heard this, he couldn't help but be moved. He said, "So you are a disciple of founding master? I have been impolite." As he said this, his mind moved. He looked at Zhang Yan and tried to ask, "Did Taoist friend come here to take the divine item left behind by founding master?" Zhang Yan didn't hide anything. He said frankly, "Yes, I came here under founding master's guidance." Guangtong's sect nodded and tried to ask, "So, Taoist friend has already been to Xianhong heaven?" Zhang Yan said concisely, "Just now, I am coming from there." Guangtong's sect had a look of understanding. He said, "Then Taoist friend must have been obstructed. This person claims to be the orthodox lineage. He doesn't care about others of the same lineage. He has long treated the divine item as his own. He has never been willing to let others have it." Zhang Yan smiled. He said, "Let's not talk about that for now. I came here this time only to visit the same lineage, nothing else." Guangtong's sect was a little surprised. He originally thought that Zhang Yan came here to ask for help. He didn't expect that to be the case. He took a deep look at the latter and said seriously, "Taoist friend, please take a seat and talk." Chapter 15:18. Zhang Yan and sect master Guangtong talked for a few days and learned a lot. The Tanbua sect was inherited from Master Sun Yu. They paid great attention to the cultivation of the state of mind. They were good at knowing fortune and misfortune and avoiding calamities. Therefore, even if Zhang Yan's realm was higher, the sect master could sense it before he came. Like the Luo Mountain Monastery, this sect also didn't receive the 3 scriptures. They only received the Yuanshan spirit sensing cave scripture. There were many people in the sect who practiced this method, but there were only a few who achieved great success. This was not surprising. There were very few people who were compatible with this method. If you had no fate with this method, it would be useless no matter how hard you tried. However, in the past, Taoist Master Sun Yu had made some slight changes to this scripture and deduced another method from it, allowing most of the disciples to practice it. Now, more than 80% of the disciples in the sect were practicing this method. Regarding this method, Taoist Tongguang was even willing to show the first half of the scripture to Zhang Yan. Zhang Yan looked at it and was greatly inspired. If he could bring it back to the sect and deduce it to perfection, it would be another method to pass on Tao. He originally wanted to exchange a superior method, but Taoist Tongguang said, "Since you are proficient in the 9 scriptures, I wonder if you can deduce a method for me?" Zhang Yan thought for a while and asked about the details of this method. Finally, he agreed. Taoist Tongguang was very happy. The Tanbua sect only had about 100 people, including registered disciples and some servants. The number of people was even smaller than the Qing sect in the past. It could not be compared to the famous Xianhong Tian. However, Although there were not many people, there were 3 mortal metamorphosis cultivators in the sect, including Taoist Tongguang. In the Su-Yang heaven, there were only 2 or 3 sects that could compare, so no one dared to provoke them. However, it wasn't that there were no hidden dangers. Because of the cultivation method, most of the people in the sect were inactive and had few desires. They just sat and watched. In the past thousands of years, they hadn't even accepted a single disciple. Others might not think about this, but as the sect master, Taoist Tongguang couldn't ignore this. If this continued, if the 3 mortal metamorphosis cultivators died for some reason, then there was the danger of the method being cut off. However, the root of the problem was the method. Once people with similar temperament and cultivation reached a high level, they would also become like this. The best way to solve this problem was to have all sorts of high-tier cultivation methods to practice, but high-tier cultivation methods were not something that could be easily obtained. Hence, when he learned that Zhang Yan knew the 9-numbered sutra, he had the thought of asking Zhang Yan to derive it for him. The sect that Zhang Yan belonged to had the same origin as the Tongba sect. Furthermore, it was personally passed down by the patriarch, so it was the most authentic one. If he derived a cultivation method, it wouldn't be considered as another sect's cultivation method and could be used to cultivate it directly. Furthermore, Zhang Yan had already severed his deceased body, so the cultivation method he derived could at least reach the grotto heaven realm. As for whether or not one could cultivate to mortal metamorphosis, it not only depended on the method, but also depended on luck. This could not be forced. Zhang Yan accepted Taoist Tongguang's invitation and stayed in the Tongba sect for a few months. He spent most of his time in the scripture pavilion, but he took this opportunity to read the Taoist books here. Deducing a method would take at least hundreds or thousands of years, but as long as a mortal metamorphosis cultivator was willing to use the divine will, they could greatly shorten the time. The only limitation was that they might lose too much of their own vitality. Fortunately, he had the remnant jade, so there was no need for such a huge consumption. Taoist Tongguang didn't know this. Seeing that he was deducing the method every day, he ordered people to send a large number of purple clear medicine. Zhang Yan considered that he still had to go to Qinghua heaven, and this was what he deserved, so he accepted it without hesitation. When he was deducing the cultivation method, he was also summarizing and organizing what he knew. In this process, his understanding of the great mystery true technique deepened. He could faintly feel that he could make a breakthrough in this cultivation method. If he took a step forward, he would definitely be able to greatly improve his fighting ability. However, this feeling was erratic and he could not accurately grasp it. After many days of fruitless thinking, he knew that this was not something that could be solved by simple deduction, so he decided to go out for a walk. As he walked out of the scripture pavilion, a loud and clear voice sounded, "Taoist Zhang has come out of seclusion?" Zhang Yan looked over and saw a short, white and chubby old man who looked like a child sitting on a tree branch. His 2 snow-white eyebrows were curved, almost reaching his knees. He said with a smile, "So it's fellow Taoist Tong Hai." This Taoist Tong Hai was Taoist Tongguang's senior of the same generation, one of the 3 mortal metamorphosis upper Jinren in Tongba sect. Although he looked like a little old man, he was forthright and straightforward. Because he liked to make friends, he was never in the sect. Today, because of Zhang Yan's visit, Taoist Tongguang called him back with the sect master's order. The purple clear medicine was personally sent by this person a few days ago. Taoist Tong Hai wrinkled his nose, and his snow-white beard trembled. He said, "Deducing the method is not something that can be done in a day or 2. Taoist Tong doesn't have to be too anxious." Zhang Yan smiled. If he had nothing to do, he could do it slowly, but he didn't have that much time to waste. He took out a leather bag filled with qi wine from his sleeve and drank 2 mouthfuls. Taoist Tong Hai took out a leather bag filled with qi wine from his sleeve and drank 2 mouthfuls. He said, "It's boring to be cooped up in the sect. I heard that the hundreds of sects in the inner realm are fighting. Although they are just juniors, it is still worth watching. Junior Brother Sect Master also asked me to find a few more disciples. How about Taoist Tong Hai come with me?" Zhang Yan thought for a moment, then nodded and agreed. Taoist Tong Hai waved his hand and a banana leaf flew over. It enlarged until it could fit a pavilion. Just now, it stopped and he jumped onto it. Zhang Yan shook his sleeve and a furry creature the size of a palm flew out. However, in just a few breaths, it grew into a large beast that was 10,000 feet long with a single horn on its head and thick fur all over its body. He floated up and sat on the beast's body. Taoist Tong Hai raised his white eyebrows and asked, "What is this? I've never seen Daoren before." Zhang Yan smiled. "This thing is called the pig cow. It is obedient and can travel in the void." Taoist Tong Hai said, "Interesting." He urged the banana leaf to fly into the sky. The pig cow also mooed and carried Zhang Yan into the sky. The two of them quickly passed through the small formation gate and arrived in Suyang sky. Taoist Tong Hai was very interested in talking. He said, "Fellow Taoist, do you know that 1,000 years ago, Xian Hongtian came and wanted me to make him an upper sect? However, he was stopped by sect master junior brother. This generation is just a guardian of the treasure, yet they are so arrogant. Let's see how much prestige they can still show after the time limit is up." Others might not know the ins and outs of Xian Hongtian, but how could the Tanbua sect not know? As for the fact that Xian Hongtian claimed to be the orthodox sect and treated all other sects of the same origin as him as a branch sect, the people from the Tanbua sect only laughed it off and did not bother to explain. This was because Mount Luo Monastery was indeed guarding the divine item for the founding master. Moreover, if they stood up for him before the 1,000,000 years were up, not only would they become a joke to others, they might even ruin the founding master's arrangements. Zhang Yan said, "I heard that your founding master Sun Yu, had 2 sections. How is the other one now?" Taoist Tong Hai said, "Fellow Taoist, are you talking about the Milky Lake sect? Sigh, I'm afraid the current situation is not very good." 1,000 years ago, the fellow Taoists of this sect received the demon subjugation edict and went to the ruins of chaotic stars to fight demons and evil. In the end, they were lost there, and not a single one of them returned. It's a pity that there are only a few juniors left in the sect. Because that place is in the heart melody world, the heavenly master is quite unyielding. As a sect of Xianyang sky, we can't interfere even if we want to. I wonder how it is now. Zhang Yan thought for a while and said, "I am not from the universal heavens. If I have the chance this time, I will go there." Taoist Tong Hai's eyes lit up. He cupped his hands at him and said in a rare serious tone, "Then I'll leave it to you, fellow Taoist. Speaking of which, I, Tanbua, belong to the same lineage as him, but I can't be of help. I'm really ashamed." After flying for half a day, the two of them arrived in front of a teleportation formation gate. The cultivator guarding the gate obviously recognized Taoist Tong Hai. When he saw Zhang Yan, an unfamiliar Taoist whose aura faintly overshadowed the former, he knew that this was another mortal shedding true essence cultivator. He hurriedly went forward and personally activated the formation gate. Once Zhang Yan and Taoist Tong Hai passed through the inner formation gate, the scenery around them instantly changed. He looked up and saw a large floating island in front of him. Clear chi rose from the island, holding up millions of golden lamps. They drifted about and shone brilliantly like stars. This should be the place where they fought. However, at this moment, there were only a few cultivators flying about. It was very quiet. Taoist Tong Hai stroked his beard and said, "Seems like I came a little early." He turned his head and said with some embarrassment, "I've let fellow Taoist see a joke." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "It's fine. Didn't fellow Taoist come to find me? Since you're here, you might as well stay for a few days." Recently, he had seen the techniques of Tanbua sect. He knew that after the people of this sect cultivated to a high level, they would pay particular attention to fate. However, within the sect, there were 2 factions, active and static. The static didn't get involved with the outside world and waited in silence. They believed that people were heaven and earth and had their own fate, so there was no need to seek outside help. The active faction, like Taoist Tong Hai, believed that fate was limited. Once you missed it, you wouldn't be able to get it again. Thus, he traveled outside all year round. Although his every move seemed random, he could unconsciously seek advantages and avoid disadvantages. This time, He suddenly wanted to come to this Dharma development conference. If there was no accident, he must have sensed something. Taoist Tonghai laughed and said, "That's fine. I have nothing to do anyway. As for finding a disciple." As he spoke, he suddenly made a sound of surprise. His gaze landed on a Taoist child who was hiding beside a bronze pillar and dozing off. "Fellow Taoist, look, this child is a little interesting." Zhang Yan looked over and saw that there was a layer of faint light on the child's body. This wasn't because he had some treasure on him, but because his body was full of essence that penetrated through his skin. He was only 7 or 8 years old and his body hadn't grown yet. Moreover, he was still fully human, yet he had such a strong foundation. This kind of foundation was really rare. Taoist Tonghai danced and clapped his hands and said, "Good luck, good luck. I didn't expect to meet such a good seedling. This should be my disciple." However, just as he was rejoicing, a scarlet wind blew past and swept the child away. A surprised voice came from inside the room. Good. Gu Zhuang Yuansher, you should be my disciple." These words were exactly the same as his. Taoist Tonghai instantly blew his beard and glared. He stood up from the banana leaf and scolded, "Which blind person dares to steal my disciple from me?" Chapter 15:19. With a gust of wind, a skinny Taoist in scarlet clothes appeared. The skin on his face was stiff, but his eyes were as sharp as an eagle's. He said, "Fellow Taoist Tonghai, please be kind with your words." Taoist Tonghai pointed at the child in his hand and said angrily, "Old man Chichang, I saw this disciple first, but you snatched him away first. What's the meaning of this?" When Zhang Yan was in the Tamba sect, Taoist Tonghai had given him a detailed introduction of the aura and appearance of the mortal molting cultivators of this world. Upon hearing this person's name, Zhang Yan knew that he was a great expert of the heterodox path, and the power behind him was not small. Taoist Chichang did not argue about who was first. He first looked at Zhang Yan with great caution, then slowly said, "Tonghai, I think this disciple is not bad. Give me some face and let me have him, then I will owe you a favor." Taoist Tonghai said disdainfully, "Who cares about your favor?" Taoist Chichang's eyes sharpened. "Tonghai, what are you going to do? Are you going to fight me here?" Taoist Tonghai snorted. Although he was indignant, he would not fight with a peer over a disciple who had yet to enter the sect. Putting aside whether or not the disciple could survive the battle, both of them were people of status. It was fine to just bickering, but if they fought over it, it would only make a joke of themselves. Although Taoist Chichang had the disciple, he did not leave because he knew that if he did not settle the matter here, there would be trouble in the future. Moreover, Zhang Yan gave him an unfathomable feeling. Even if they fought, he was afraid that he would be at a disadvantage. He thought for a moment, then raised his voice and said, "Taoist Tonghai, why don't you listen to my suggestion?" Taoist Tonghai said impatiently, "Say it." Taoist Chichang said, "Since you and I both like this disciple, why don't we make a bet?" Taoist Tonghai stroked his beard and said, "What kind of bet?" Taoist Chishan pointed around and said, "Fellow Taoist, since you're here, I'm sure you're aware that there will be a competition here in a few days. Why don't you and I each pick one of those wandering cultivators and secretly give them some pointers? The one we pick will be able to go further, and he or she will be able to teach his or her disciple." The meaning of his words was obvious. The one who lost would naturally not be the one to teach the disciple. How would he have the face to accept such a talent? Tonghai snorted and thought for a moment, then agreed, "Let's do that. But before that, you can't take the boy away." Taoist Chishan thought for a moment and said, "All right, I'll listen to you." With a flick of his sleeve, he ordered the child to return to where he had been napping. Then, he transformed into a streak of scarlet light and flew away. At the same time, a voice came from afar. "Then we'll meet again after the battle." Taoist Tonghai said with a gloomy expression, "It's rare for me to fancy a disciple, but he was almost snatched away." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Could it be that you think your sect can't win this bet?" Taoist Tonghai sighed and said, "It's difficult. Chi Chang's disciple does have a set of skills. I'm not as good as him. What's more, he has a disciple nephew who is even better at this. Zhang Yan smiled and said nothing. Taoist Tong Hai glanced at him and showed hesitation. Finally, he gritted his teeth and cupped his hands and said, "If you are willing to help, I will owe you a favor." When they made the agreement just now, the two sides did not clearly state what they should do and what they should not do. This left too much leeway for them to maneuver around. The two of them did not point it out, but in reality, they both had the intention of borrowing strength from each other. Zhang Yan smiled and said, "You don't have to say that. If you have any request, I can help. But I think that Taoist Qi Chong will do the same. I don't think he can win." Taoist Tong Hai said confidently, "It's just a show of our abilities. With Taoist Zhang's expertise in the Tao of 9 numbers, I don't believe that the person he finds can win against you." Zhang Yan said meaningfully, "That's not necessarily true. If I choose a disciple, I have a 90% chance of winning against this person. But if you choose a disciple, it may not be true." Taoist Tong Hai was moved and thought for a while. After a while, he said sincerely, "It's fine. No matter what the result is, I will recognize you this time." Zhang Yan nodded and said, "Since you trust me so much, I will do my best." It was naturally better to do this as soon as possible. But choosing a suitable person was not something Zhang Yan could interfere with. According to the agreement, only Daoren Tong Hai could do it. The Dharma Developing Assembly was set to be 10 days later, but cultivators who participated in the assembly had arrived one after another. Most of them were Yuanian cultivators and were itinerant cultivators. If it was in the original 9 continents, it was already good enough for an itinerant cultivator to cultivate to the core formation realm. But the Yuan heavens was different. It was convenient to travel between worlds, and it was easier to obtain external objects. Who knew how many powerful cultivators had left their abodes and inheritances in some hidden worlds? However, it was still very possible for an itinerant cultivator to cultivate to the Yuanian realm, but it was difficult to reach the Grotto Heaven realm. After all, reaching this stage required the ability to move mountains and seas, and it also involved various superior cultivation methods. Moreover, it required a large amount of external medicine. Cultivators who did not have a strong foundation and the support of a great force could not achieve this. Daoren Tong Hai watched for a few days but did not find a suitable person. Then he ran off to some unknown place. Zhang Yan guessed that he went to find a suitable person and encourage him to participate in the assembly. This way, it could not be considered a violation of the agreement. However, he did not leave this place. Instead, he carefully observed everyone in this place. He also decided to find another person to impart his cultivation method to. The purpose of choosing this person was to suppress his opponent and help the person chosen by Taoist Tong Hai to ascend to the position. He also believed that Taoist Qishan would definitely do the same. After a cultivator cultivated to the Yuanian realm, because their foundation was already set, it was not easy to improve their strength purely through cultivation methods unless there was a great opportunity. Moreover, some itinerant cultivators had already exhausted their potential. No matter how much help they received, they could not go far. There seemed to be a lot of people here, but in fact, there were very few people to choose from. When there were only 3 days left until the assembly, his gaze fell on a Taoist with red eyes. In terms of talent, although this person was not bad, he was not the most outstanding. However, this person had an extremely strong belief, which made him stand out among the crowd. This was very rare. After a cultivator entered the path, because of all kinds of tribulations, the sharpness of his body was usually blunted until the edges and corners were smoothed out. Itinerant cultivators were even more so, but the more setbacks they encountered, the more courageous they became. Clearly, they were born with an extraordinary temperament. Zhang Yan smiled and said, "It's you." He raised his finger and pointed. A ray of spiritual light condensed into a jade talisman. It flew towards the Taoist with red eyes who was sitting cross-legged and quickly entered the space between his eyebrows. At the same time, in the stone-striking sky, a giant the size of a small mountain was lying on the ground, as if he was in a deep sleep. The plants in the distance rose and fell with his continuous breathing. Although his body was huge and his face was fierce, There were many laughing plant spirits playing around on his body. It was obvious that he was not afraid. He was originally snoring loudly, but suddenly his body trembled. His eyes opened and he sat up. The plant spirits also cried out in surprise and fell to the ground, disappearing one by one. The giant supported his head with his hand and revealed a look of contemplation. Just now, he suddenly felt a sense of fear. This had never happened before, and he guessed that something dangerous was about to happen. At this moment, he suddenly sensed two auras coming from the distance. One of them was huge, and it was his disciple, Yu Ao. The other one was very unfamiliar, and he could not help but narrow his eyes. Not long after, the two of them arrived together. Zhu Ao said in surprise, "Teacher, you're awake?" He pointed at the cultivator beside him and said, "Teacher, this is Tong Xinzhong, a disciple of Mount Luo Monastery's Gong Shangzhen. I've come to visit you on teacher's orders." Tong Xinzhong came forward and cupped his hands. Junior greets Zhu Rong Shangzhen. He knew that the person in front of him was not a human cultivator, but an unusual race known as a giant spirit. This race had huge bodies and were extremely brave. They were naturally suited to walk the path of strength. This person had even cultivated to an extremely profound realm. Even if his teacher fought him head-on, he might not be able to defeat him. Zhu Rong nodded and said, "I haven't seen Gong Shangzhen for several hundred years. How is he recently?" Tong Yozhong said respectfully, "Teacher is doing well. Here's a letter that teacher told me to give to Shangzhen." As he said that, he took out a jade letter and handed it over. Zhu Rong moved his body and took in a light breath. The jade letter suddenly flew over and spun in the air. When it landed in his hand, it was exactly the size of a palm. He opened it and looked at it. Then he raised his head and said, "Go back and tell fellow Taoist Gong that I understand his intentions." Tong Xinzhong bowed again and turned to leave. Zhu Ao also seemed to sense something. He asked in a deep voice, "Teacher, is there something wrong?" Zhu Rong handed the jade letter to him and said, "Go and take a look." Zhu Ao took it and looked through it. His eyes widened as he said, "So Gong Shangzhen asked teacher to deal with someone." He raised his head and asked, "Teacher, are you going to make a move?" Zhu Rong said in a deep voice, "A long time ago, I formed a karmic relationship with this person. I have to return it to him. Since he came begging me, I must go." Zhu Ao said, "If teacher is going to make a move, this person definitely won't be able to escape." Zhu Rong shook his head and said, "It won't be that easy. If fellow Taoist Gong is right, this person's sect is the direct disciple of the great underworld patriarch. I don't know what kind of powerful divine art he has learned. I'm afraid he won't be easy to deal with." In order to prevent the matter from failing, Gong Shangzhen didn't purposely hide any information. He told Zhu Rong everything he knew about Zhang Yan's background and the skills that he had revealed. If it were any other time, Zhu Rong might not make a move immediately. However, just now, the palpitations he felt caused him to hesitate. Zhu Ao said in annoyance, "It's a pity that disciple is slow-witted. My skills are too shallow and I can't help teacher. Otherwise, I could help teacher share his burden." Zhu Rong stroked his beard that seemed to be pricked by needles. He said, "It's a pity that your martial uncle has accepted the demons subduing edict to kill demons and evils. I don't know when he'll return. Otherwise, with the two of us working together, it'll be easy to deal with this person. Looks like I'll have to borrow a few treasures." Website. Chapter 1520. Rin-ji had originally been in a meditative state. But suddenly, he found that he had fallen into a state of confusion where it was hard to tell what was real and what was fake. Enemies were constantly charging at him, fighting him. He killed one and then another. It was like there was no end to them. If it was anyone else, it wouldn't be long before they would feel despair and pessimism when faced with such an endless stream of enemies. However, he wasn't like that. He continued to deal with the incoming enemies calmly, as if he could continue to fight until the moment he died. Just as he was immersed in the battle, a thought seed appeared in Zhang Yan's hand. Through the battle in Rin-ji's consciousness, Zhang Yan was able to easily learn all of Renji's cultivation methods and their variations. With this, Zhang Yan was able to deduce the most suitable cultivation method for Renji. Tong Hai said he didn't believe anyone could defeat him because of this. Even if Taoist Qi Chang taught another disciple, he wouldn't have the ability to do so. Another 2 days passed, and when there was only 1 day left until the battle, Taoist Tong Hai finally came back, but he brought a young cultivator with him. Zhang Yan smiled. "You're back, fellow Taoist." Taoist Tong Hai pointed at the young cultivator and said, "Fellow Taoist, what do you think of the person I chose?" The young cultivator's expression was calm, and he came forward to bow. "Junior Xen Chuan greets great sage." Zhang Yan looked at him and commented, "Your aptitude is not bad." Taoist Tong Hai laughed and said proudly, "It took me a long time to find this kind of talent." He then bowed and said, "I'll have to trouble fellow Taoist to take care of him." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Of course. Since fellow Taoist has not been around, I have chosen someone." Taoist Tong Hai was surprised at first, but after thinking for a while, he understood his intention and said, "Fellow Taoist, are you using this person to prevent Taoist Qi Chang from using the same technique?" Zhang Yan nodded. "That's right." Taoist Tong Hai asked curiously, "Who and where did you choose?" Zhang Yan flicked his finger, and the spiritual seed turned into a ray of spiritual light that shot down. "This is the person." Taoist Tong Hai followed the light and saw a red-eyed cultivator. He frowned and said, "This person's aptitude seems ordinary." Zhang Yan smiled. Taoist Tong Hai believed that aptitude was the key, but Zhang Yan believed that temperament was more important in a competition like this, where the difference in cultivation wasn't too great. The methods developing competition was just around the corner, and it was practically impossible to quickly raise one's strength in a short period of time, unless one was bestowed a top-notch medicinal pill that could replenish one's spiritual essence. But this was actually a bad plan. Relying on medicinal pills to increase one's cultivation would not only not show off one's abilities, but one's opponent would also know at a glance. This was equivalent to admitting that one's teaching methods were not as good as others, and on the contrary, one's battle experience and the method of using one's spiritual essence could be made up for. Just like how he manifested different opponents in Renji's consciousness, the longer one endured, the more benefits one would receive. This depended on one's willpower, not aptitude. Only a person with a firm and unyielding temperament was the best choice just now. At this moment, on the other side, a Daoran person was kowtowing to Taoist Qi Chang with a look of gratitude. "Thank you, great sage, for bestowing this technique." Taoist Qi Chang's expression was indifferent, and he said, "Don't thank me. I told you before, if you use this technique too much, your spiritual essence will be exhausted and you will die. But I will definitely take care of your descendants, and I will not go back on my word." Just as Zhang Yan had expected, he had chosen another person to pass on the technique too, so as to pave the way for the cultivator he had chosen. As for why he did not pass it on to a few more people, first, because there were very few cultivators who were worthy of his attention. Second, the methods developing competition was backed by the various sects of Xianyang Heaven, and they would not allow him to do as he pleased here. He could choose 1 or 2 people to manipulate, and he could turn a blind eye to it. But if he chose a few more people, then he would be suspected of manipulating the methods developing competition behind his back, and when that time came, he would not be in a good mood. The Daoran person hesitated for a moment, and asked, "Great sage, how many times can I use this technique?" Taoist Qi Chang replied, "With your current lifespan, you can only use it 4 or 5 times at most. I have to warn you, the opponent this time is not to be underestimated. Do not use it unless it is a critical moment." The Daoran person quickly agreed. After Taoist Qi Chang sent him away, he turned around and came to the cave behind. There sat a cultivator with a rough face, thick eyebrows, and big eyes. At first glance, he did not seem to be very shrewd, but in fact, this person's talent was so high that it almost made the Taoist Qi Chang want to take him as a disciple. Unfortunately, he was still a rogue cultivator, and his path of cultivation had gone astray. His future achievements would be very limited, and at best, he would only be able to cultivate a Dharmakaya. It was really a pity. When the person saw Taoist Chichang enter, he stood up, bowed, and said, "Great sage, do you have any instructions for me?" Taoist Chichang said coldly, "Su Quan, how is your cultivation going?" Su Quan said respectfully, "What great sage has taught is very profound, and I have only understood a little of it." Taoist Chichang said, "It is good enough that you understand a little, and it will be enough for you to show off in the methods developing competition." Su Quan said, "I still have to thank great sage for helping me." Taoist Chichang said, "I have already built the bridge for you. Whether you can cross or not is up to you. You must remember, this matter is very important to me. If you lose, not only will I take your life, but your friends and relatives will also not escape." Su Quan did not seem to be affected by these words and said calmly, "I will do my best." Taoist Chichang said nothing more, and his figure gradually disappeared. Seeing that he had left, Su Quan could not help but feel relieved. Although the cultivation methods that the other party had given him were profound, their origins were strange, and they did not seem to be from the Orthodox Church. Therefore, he did not dare to cultivate with all his strength, and still left some leeway. Although he knew that this might not be of much use, there was still a glimmer of hope. A day passed in the blink of an eye, and soon it was the day of the methods developing competition. Elders and deacons from all the sects had arrived, but most of them were hiding in the void sky, not showing themselves, so that the junior cultivators would not be affected by their chi dynamics. Taoist Tong Hai indeed had a wide circle of friends. 9 out of 10 of those who came were acquainted with him, and Zhang Yan also took this opportunity to get to know a few of the metamorphosis mortal cultivators in Xianyang Heaven. At this moment, in Tianyu, Renji was sitting in a cave abode. A graceful lady walked in with a palace lantern in her hand, and there were a few maids behind her. She bowed to him and said, "Spiritual Master Ren, it's time for you to perform the technique in a moment." Renji asked, "Who is my opponent?" The woman said, "The sage's name is Li Yuan Kai, and I heard that he has a cultivation of the 2nd degree, which is the same as a sage." Most of the participants in the methods developing competition were Yuanian cultivators, but they were limited to the 1st and 2nd degrees. As for those who had cultivated the Yuanian Dharmakaya, all the sects were willing to put an effort to recruit them. Moreover, their battle prowess was far beyond that of the cultivators below them, so they naturally would not appear here. Renji stood up and walked out. When he stepped on a jade path, he felt his vision blur, and he arrived in a dense forest. He knew that this was just a change in the exterior scenery, and he was actually still in Tianyu. In front of him stood a green-robed Taoist with flying jade rings around him, and the Taoist was looking at him coldly. He raised his head and did not say a word. He only circulated his mana, and a dazzling glow rose from his body. He rushed up, and in an instant he was fighting with the Taoist. After a few hours, he successfully defeated the Taoist and returned to the cave unscathed. He swallowed the elixir that the servant girl gave him, and after a short rest, he became energetic again. His eyes flashed. Over the past few days, whenever he meditated, there would be countless powerful enemies coming to fight him. Demons, ferocious monsters, cultivators, and other races, there was no one he was not prepared for. Inexplicably, there was an additional key to the method developing in his heart. Although he did not deliberately cultivate it, he could not help but use it when fighting enemies. Now, he had become more and more familiar with it. He was also a smart person, and he could guess that there must be a powerful cultivator who was trying to teach him. This was a rare opportunity, so not only did he not resist, but he also devoted himself to it. This caused his strength to grow even faster. Although his mana did not improve much, his fighting ability had increased by a lot. Just now, the green-robed Taoist was very powerful. Whether it was the cultivation of the Marquis or the divine Taoist arts, he was not inferior to him at all. If it was a few days ago, he might be able to win after a hard fight, but he would most likely suffer a great loss of vitality. Now, however, he did not pay much of a price and successfully defeated the Taoist. He thought to himself, "I wonder which one helped me. If I can win this time, I must find a way to repay him." As the thought crossed his mind, he closed his eyes and entered a meditative state to fight the opponent that appeared in front of him again. In the following month, he frequently fought and defeated his opponents. His performance became more and more outstanding, and he actually caught the attention of many sections. There were indeed many people who came to recruit him, but he rejected all of them. Zhang Yan also saw Renji's performance these days. Seeing that he rejected the recruitment of the sects, he knew his intention, and he could not help but smile. This person's temperament was persevering, and he was indeed a talent that could be molded. As he traveled the heavens, he indeed needed someone to run errands for him. If he could really walk to the end, he could give him a chance. As the thought crossed his mind, an inexplicable feeling of danger arose in his heart. His eyes flashed, and he looked into the void. This feeling, it was obvious that someone wanted to harm him, and this person was about to arrive. In the heaven ring of Xianyang, Zhu Rong's enormous body squeezed out. His appearance caused the surrounding spiritual vigor to shake, and the floating island shook as if it was about to fall. The starlight in the sky also dimmed and brightened. The guards suddenly became very nervous. He came up and bowed. "Supreme Being Zhu Rong, why have you come to my realm?" Zhu Rong said, "I'm here to find someone to return a favor to an old friend. You all can rest assured that this person is not a cultivator from your heaven Xianyang. If there are any losses, I will apologize to the heaven lord of Suyang." With that, he stomped on the ground. With a rumble, he tore open the void and disappeared. The guard's expression was ugly. He called for someone and said, "Go back and tell the other cultivators that Zhu Rong has come to our realm. This person is ruthless, and I don't know which guest has become enemies with him. We have to be on guard." Chapter 1521. Not long after the Taoist guard gave the order, rays of light flew in all directions. Some of them headed straight for the floating heavenly island where the conference was held. At this moment, Zhang Yan and Taoist Tong Hai were watching the battle below. Now, it was Xian Chuan's turn to fight. His performance was also very outstanding. In just a few rounds, he had suppressed his opponent and won easily. Seeing this, Taoist Tong Hai was very happy. "Taoist Zhang, in your opinion, if Xian Chuan and Renji were to fight, who would win?" Zhang Yan said, "In a battle of life and death, Renji can win, but in a battle of techniques, Xian Chuan can win." Taoist Tong Hai thought for a moment and nodded in agreement. The way these two fought was completely different. Renji would often seize the opportunity to survive. This kind of method, it was either you die or I die, it was truly dangerous. Xian Chuan was not an independent cultivator, but a disciple of Taoist Tong Hai who lived in seclusion. It was just that he lived in a small world and was not known to outsiders. Not to mention his deep foundation, his skills were all top-notch. Not only that, he also had a few powerful magic treasures. This time, if he didn't know he could receive guidance from an expert, his master wouldn't have let him out no matter what. Ordinary independent cultivators couldn't compete with him, and he won every battle by a large margin. But this was just a technique conference. Everyone knew that their lives weren't in danger, so they could bring out their full strength. But if it was a battle of life and death, it was different. There were too many factors that could affect the outcome. In this aspect, as an independent cultivator, Renji had experienced many battles, and Xian Chuan couldn't compare to him. Taoist Tong Hai looked around and said, "Taoist Zhang, do you know where Qi Chang's chosen person is?" Zhang Yan smiled. "There are one or two suspicious people." In reality, regardless of who it was, Xian Chuan and Renji only needed to defeat all of their opponents to win the bet. As for whether the two of them would meet before then, the art exhibition was a round of battles, and the one with the most wins would win. Even if Renji took the initiative to concede against Xian Chuan, he would only lose one match. Up till now, he had not lost a single match, and thus it did not affect the overall situation. As he was speaking, he suddenly sensed something. He looked in a certain direction, and his eyes became deep and serene. Taoist Tong Hai also looked over but saw nothing. He asked curiously, "Fellow Taoist, is there something wrong?" Zhang Yan pondered for a moment and said, "Fellow Taoist, if something happens later, please don't interfere. I will take care of it myself." Taoist Tong Hai was surprised to see how serious he was, but he didn't ask anything and just nodded while stroking his beard. At this moment, there was a series of sharp whistles, and rays of spiritual light flew over from afar. Taoist Tong Hai looked and his expression became serious. It's a warning message. There are so many of them, could something big have happened? He reached out and caught a message. He opened it and snorted, "Zhu Rong? This person came to my Xianyang sky to stir up trouble again? How hateful!" Zhang Yan sensed that this person seemed to be related to him, so he asked, "Who is this?" Taoist Tong Hai said, "This Zhu Rong is from the giant spirit tribe, but his bloodline isn't pure, so he was abandoned by the tribe long ago. Fortunately, one of his parents had a high status in the tribe and left behind many legacies. Because of these things and his innate talent, a sect saw that he had a lot of potential, so they took him in. However, the sect was later destroyed by the demons, and he and a few of his junior brothers formed a loose alliance. For thousands of years, he roamed the heavens, and no matter who you are, as long as you can pay, he will help you get rid of your enemies." Zhang Yan said, "It's very easy to offend people by doing this. This person is not simple to be able to roam freely until now." Taoist Tong Hai said, "That's because this person has cultivated to the 6th transformation of strength path and comprehended a technique to imbue flesh and blood. When fighting with others, even if he dies, he can come back to life with his remaining flesh and blood. Almost no one can kill him on the spot, and it's also because of this technique that the number of people who died in the hands of this person and his junior brothers can be counted on one hand." Zhang Yan raised his eyebrows. The number of mortal cultivators in the heavens was limited. Even if one of them died, it would still be a shock. This person could actually kill so many of his peers, and that was not just because of the secret technique. If he really wanted to deal with it, even the most powerful technique would have a way to break it. This person must have something else to rely on. As he thought of this, he asked, "Who is behind this person?" Taoist Tong Hai said, "Fellow Taoist, you are right. Zhu Heaven's heavenly lord Zhu is also a giant spirit. Rumor has it that this person is Zhu Rong's biological father, and his mother seems to have an even more powerful background. She seems to be a disciple of the Green Jade Palace, and Zhu Rong has never attacked the sects or the heavenly lords, so the heavenly lords can't be bothered to deal with him." Zhang Yan nodded. "If that's the case, then it makes sense. As long as it was not a matter of personal interest, even a heavenly lord would not easily offend another heavenly lord, not to mention that this matter involved the Green Jade Palace. In reality, it was not that no one had tried to gather their peers to besiege Zhu Rong, but it was too difficult to do so. After reaching the realm of mortal transformation, which one of them was not an almighty being, if they wanted to gather, the commotion would definitely not be small, and they would have long been discovered by others. Moreover, with such a cultivation base, they would have a certain sense of danger. Zhu Rong was even more skilled in this, and almost every time, he would escape first. Taoist Tong Hai casually dissolved the warning talisman and sighed, "Zhu Rong came here, I wonder who he is targeting." As he said this, he suddenly seemed to have thought of something, and his expression shook. He suddenly looked over, and his eyes widened. "Fellow Taoist Zhang, could it be that this person is here for you?" Zhang Yan smiled and said, "I'm afraid so." However, Taoist Tong Hai was anxious, and he grabbed his sleeve and said, "This person cannot be defeated by force. Even if you win, you will easily attract endless trouble. Let's go. Fellow Taoist should return to the sect first, and it's better to avoid him." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "If I hide today, will I have to hide in the future?" Taoist Tong Hai was startled, and he slowly let go of his hand and said solemnly, "Then, fellow Taoist, please be careful." Zhang Yan nodded. With a rumble, a loud sound came from the sky, and the void suddenly split open. Then, an incomparably huge giant holding a golden hammer walked out. As this person arrived, Tianyu, which was not far away, was protected by the formation, but it also shook unstably, and the airflow in the sky raged wildly. The dense sea of clouds that gathered there was originally a hole, and it continued to spread in all directions. All the cultivators who were fighting felt their chi dynamic becoming unstable, and they felt that their mana was about to surge. All of them turned pale with fright, and they had to sit down and use the formation to suppress their chi dynamic. Zhenren Fan too, who was present, frowned, and some people's expressions changed slightly. Through the warning message, they already knew that Zhu Rong had come to the realm, and they were originally worried about the instability of the sect, but they didn't expect that he would actually find this place. Then, the person he was looking for must be among them. A few of them secretly took precautions. It was hard to say that this person was not looking for them. At this time, it was already too late to hide, or else, if word got out, not only would they lose all their face, even the sect's reputation would be affected because of this. Just when the atmosphere was tense, a grand white light suddenly appeared in the sky, and from it, a person of Daoren wearing an apricot-yellow Taoist robe and a Yun Song Dharma crown walked out. His body was wrapped in auspicious light, and he turned to Zhu Rong and said, "Fellow Taoist Zhu Rong, this is the place where the 100 sects compete. Is it inappropriate for your chi dynamic to be so ostentatious?" Unexpectedly, Zhu Rong was exceptionally easy to talk to this time, and nodded, "Fellow Taoist is right, I was rash." As he spoke, the chi dynamic on his body gradually converged, and Tianyu also stopped shaking. Doran's expression relaxed slightly. To be honest, there was almost no one here, including him, who was willing to face this person. If there was 30% fear of his strength, then the remaining 70% fear of the person behind him. However, he still did not let down his guard and said, "Fellow Taoist Zhu Rong, why are you here?" Zhu Rong said in a low voice, "In front of the ring, I said that this time, I was entrusted by someone to come here to find a person, and it has nothing to do with the people of Xianyang Heaven, so fellow Taoist Lin can rest assured." That person of Daoren still frowned. Those who could come to the competition were not people who were on good terms with the sects, and more or less had some involvement. If he sat back and did nothing, it would not be good for his reputation if it was spread out. Zhu Rong seemed to see through his thoughts and said, "Fellow Taoist need not be troubled, this person is also not from the Yuhuan Heaven." As he spoke, he turned to look in a direction. Everyone also looked over, and saw that the place where his gaze landed was where Zhang Yan was. A few people could not help but show a look of sympathy, and secretly thought, "I wonder how this person offended Zhu Rong." Zhu Rong stared at Zhang Yan. He was still a little suspicious about the inexplicable fear that day, but he could not be sure if it really should be related to the latter. He had already decided in his heart, if there was that kind of feeling at this moment, then he would retreat first, and wait for his junior brother to return, then he would deal with it. But after a long time, there were still no signs of warning, and he immediately relaxed. Under his gaze, Zhang Yan was as calm as before. There was no change in his expression, but at this moment he had a feeling. He felt an inexplicable consciousness flash past his body, and he could not help but look up, and his heart sank slightly. This feeling was extremely weak. It was not easy to find the source, and it did not seem to have malicious intent towards him. At this moment, a great enemy was in front of him. It was not the time to pay attention to it. In the depths of void sky, a Taoist put away a green jade badge and turned around. He cupped his fists towards an incomparably grand light and said, "Master, disciple has already concealed the changes in the heavenly secrets, but that Taoist Zhang seems to have noticed something." A voice came out from the bright light, "It's okay, this Zhenren Zhang's cultivation is quite high, he can tell the pros and cons, he won't say much." Chapter 1522. Under the gazes of the crowd, Zhu Rong slowly moved towards Zhang Yan. When he was not far away from Zhang Yan, he stood still. His mountain-like body blocked out the sunlight, and half of the skies suddenly darkened. He looked at Zhang Yan and said in a booming voice, "I'm here on behalf of a fellow Taoist. As long as you swear not to go to Xianyang Heaven within 1,000 years, I can promise you that I won't make things difficult for you." Priest Gong's letter to him was to find a way to make Zhang Yan stay in outer space. He did not mention anything else. There were two ways to do it. One was to kill the target and settle things once and for all. The other was to threaten and curse. Although he was not weak in fights of magical powers and had killed many cultivators of the same generation, It did not come without a price. This time, he was only here to return a favor. Even if he won, he would not get any benefits. If he could, he would rather use the latter method to settle this matter. This was also the reason why he came here with great fanfare. He wanted Zhang Yan to clearly see the power he possessed and make the latter retreat. When the crowd heard his words, they all revealed thoughtful expressions. If Zhu Rong had only asked Zhang Yan not to go to Xianhong Heaven, perhaps they would not have thought much of it. At most, they would think that Zhang Yan had offended a spiritual master in Xianhong Heaven. However, when he mentioned the 1,000 years limit, they could not help but think of the divine item left behind by the great underworld patriarch. Connecting the cause and effect of these two matters, many people guessed the whole story on the spot. This spiritual master Zhang in front of them was very likely the owner of the divine item in Xianhong Heaven. However, Mount Luo Monastery was unwilling to take it out. Now that they had invited Zhu Rong, it was obvious that they wanted to force him to give it up. Taoist Tong Hai also thought of this, but he could not tell whether it was true or not. Just now, Zhang Yan had said that he only needed to watch from the side, so he endured it and did not speak. At this moment, Zhang Yan was also sizing Zhu Rong up. This person must have found the root fruit to be able to walk in the heavens without being bound by a realm. Moreover, this person was different from Guizhu. He had inherited the cultivation method of his ancestors, so his divine ability must be extremely powerful. However, he had not reached that step. He replied indifferently, "What I do is not something you can control." Zhu Rong didn't give up on persuading him. He said in a deep voice, "I know why you're here, but with the 10 exalted true masters of the Black Flood Heaven and the Black Flood Heaven Lord holding the fort, you don't stand a chance, so why are you so persistent? Take a step back, it will be good for both you and others." The spiritual masters were a little surprised. This Zhu Rong was easy to talk to today. In the past, he never gave his opponents a chance. However, after thinking about it again, this spiritual master Zhang's qi was deep and his strength was really unpredictable. He would not be easy to deal with. Moreover, if he was really the owner of the divine item determined by the great underworld patriarch, then his background was not small. Zhang Yan said calmly, "Whether we stay or leave, whether we choose to give up or not, it's all an internal matter of our sect. Outsiders are not allowed to interfere." He looked up. "Since you've come to find me, why do you need to say so much?" Zhu Rong stared at him for a moment and said, "Fine." Since he could not persuade him, then he would subdue him with force. He looked around and said, "This is the venue of the 100 sect rehearsals. It is not suitable to fight here. Why don't we change to another place?" He also knew that he had made a lot of noise by coming here and probably caused a lot of dissatisfaction. Normal people could not care less, but the Heavenly Lord of Xianyang Heaven could not. Even though he usually did not care about things, it was hard to say if he would not intervene when the venue of the 100 sect rehearsals was disrupted. Zhang Yan had no objections. With a thought, he turned into a clear light and flew into the sky. Zhu Rong also let out a roar and rose into the sky. Both of them were extremely fast. Soon, they arrived outside the land. It was a vast void around them. It was empty and the stars in the sky were only specks of light. The spiritual masters also followed. It was extremely rare to see a battle of this level. Moreover, this was not a spar but a real battle of life and death. How could they miss it? Only Daoren, who had spoken to Zhu Rong before, did not move. He stroked his beard and pondered for a moment. He looked down at Tianyu and thought, a battle between two spiritual masters is a rare opportunity. I will fulfill your wish. He took out a jade plate and placed his hands between his thumb and forefinger. The plate flew up by itself. One side reflected the void and the other side shone on the floating platform of Tianyu. Instantly, the figures of Zhang Yan and Zhu Rong appeared. Not only that, but as the rays of light continued to jump out, the same scene appeared in every place where the battles were taking place. Even the mortal sheds in Xianyang sky who hadn't come to watch the battle were alarmed. They all came out of their meditations and paid attention to the battle. Taoist Tong Hai was already above Tianyu. He used his spirit to communicate, "Taoist friend Zhang, I heard that Zhu Rong has a treasure for escaping. It is this treasure that allows him to come and go as he pleases without fear of being pursued. In the past, no one who was targeted by him could escape. Once you fight with him, it is impossible to retreat. The only way to have a chance of winning is to defeat him with all your might. Zhang Yan nodded slightly and said, "Thank you for telling me." He looked around and saw that he was far enough away from the land. Hence he stopped. Zhu Rong saw that he stopped and also stopped. He then took a few steps back and took a deep breath. He was already a giant. With the activation of this breath of spiritual vigor, he grew even bigger. In the past, he had fought countless battles and accumulated a wealth of experience. Once he entered the state of fighting, he could cut off all distracting thoughts and worries. The only goal left was to defeat and kill his opponent. The battle between cultivators of the same generation was usually a battle between the primordial spirit and the root fruit. However, he was born with a strong body. Coupled with his acquired cultivation, his body was almost indestructible. This meant that even if he did not use the root fruit, he could still block many attacks. When his opponent encountered his attacks, he had to sacrifice the root fruit to avoid them. In comparison, he had a huge advantage. However, this didn't mean that he didn't have any weaknesses. He relied on many treasures to make up for these weaknesses one by one. Furthermore, he still had the flesh sustenance technique. Even if he was destroyed on the spot, he could still come back to life. At this moment, Zhu Rong felt that his previous worries were laughable. Here, unless the Shenyang Heaven Lord personally came, who else could really threaten him? As his aura grew stronger, a golden light bloomed from his body. The brilliance was so bright that it almost covered the sun in the distance. The golden hammer in his hand was also slowly raised. Fan Shu and Shang Jin knew that he was about to attack. One by one, they took out their magical treasures to prevent themselves from being affected by the aftershock. On the many islands below, all the cultivators watching this scene held their breaths. It was as if their minds were seized. Their bodies felt like they had sunk into the deep sea and were enveloped by boundless pressure. This was only the accumulation of power. He had not actually attacked yet. If this hammer were to strike, it was hard to imagine what kind of damage it would cause. Everyone tensed up. In front of the jade tablet, everyone felt as if they were in the same situation. They did not know how Zhang Shangjin would block this attack. Zhu Rong's golden hammer was gradually raised high. Even though the aura on his body continued to rise, his expression still maintained its previous calm and indifference. This golden hammer was a supreme treasure left to him by the giant spirit clan. It had a special characteristic. As long as it was raised and successfully swung, it would definitely hit the opponent. No defensive magical treasure in the world could block it. Even if one tried to escape, it would be useless. The only way to deal with it was to interfere midway. In the past, none of the cultivators who fought with him would let him act calmly. They would all try to stop him. However, once they did so, they would fall into his rhythm and arrangements. However, Zhang Yan stood there without moving. Therefore, he judged that the other party should have seen through this and was unwilling to fall into the trap. In that case, the only way to block this attack was to use the root fruit to avoid it. This was a good thing. With just one attack, he could force the other party to use the root fruit. It could be said that he had gained the upper hand from the beginning. This thought flashed through his mind. At this moment, the golden hammer was already raised high. Whether it was his aura or strength, both had risen to the peak. With a roar, he smashed the hammer down in front of him. Zhang Yan's eyes suddenly became deep. He did not dodge, nor did he use the root fruit. Instead, he met this person's attack with a punch. The moment he attacked, there was a loud bang. He saw countless Zhu Rongs swinging their hammers at him. This was not an illusion, but a change in the future that he saw. After reaching the great perfection of the Strength Path 6 revolutions, he was already entrenched above the past and the future. Although he was limited by his Strength Path body and was unable to be like Kong Ing back then, he was unable to fear the attacks of anyone with a lower cultivation base than him. However, he was able to predict all the changes his opponent would make. Every Zhu Rong here was real. They were all shadows of the future that could display their full strength. As long as he killed them, he would kill the Ju Rong themselves. When he punched out, a Ju Rong's body exploded before he could swing his hammer. In the next moment, it was as if nothing had happened. Everything returned to the beginning. Before he was hit by Zhang Yan's punch, a treasure in front of his chest flew out and released a ray of light to block the attack. The giant hammer successfully smashed onto Zhang Yan's body, but not long after, it was once again shattered by a ray of light. Everything returned to the moment when he swung his golden hammer. This time, he did not take out a treasure to protect himself. Instead, he stopped his hammer and used another technique. But not long after, it was once again shattered by thousands of lightning bolts, and everything returned to the beginning. Ju Rong continued to use all sorts of methods here, but they were all crushed mercilessly by Zhang Yan one after another. His numbers became fewer and fewer, and the point of recovery was also constantly receding. This was because every time he was killed, a future would be snatched away, and a possibility would be severed. As the Ju melts disappeared one by one, only one was left. In the real world, Zhang Yan's punch had just now Zhang Yan's real punch had been delivered. Chapter 293, The Antecedents of the Unfinished Relationship. Chapter 1523. In the blink of an eye, Zhang Yan's punch had reached its end. Then, everyone heard an earth-shattering sound. The sound did not come from the outside, but from everyone's hearts. Looking at the battlefield again, it was as if nothing had happened. Ju Rong still maintained his original expression. He raised his golden hammer high, and a murderous aura filled the sky. However, the expressions of the onlookers were strange. They felt as if something was different, but they couldn't pinpoint what it was. A moment later, a scene that shocked everyone appeared. Cracks appeared on the surface of Ju Rong's body. First, it started from his face, and then it gradually spread outwards. Very quickly, it covered his entire body. In the end, his entire body shattered like glass, and it turned into specks of light before disappearing. Zhang Yan's expression was indifferent as he slowly withdrew his hand. With that strike just now, he had already killed all of Ju Rong's possibilities and severed all of Ju Rong's futures. So, the moment he swung his fist, Ju Rong was destined to die. However, Ju Rong's cultivation was still there. He had also expended a lot of divine will in order to defeat his opponent with one blow. If there had been a mistake in the process, or if one of Ju Rong's future shadows had escaped, it would mean that he still had a chance of survival and could not be completely killed. Not to mention that all of his previous efforts would have been wasted, but he would have wasted a lot of vitality. However, in the eyes of outsiders, all of this happened in an instant. They only watched as Zhang Yan punched, and Ju Rong collapsed and died. The scene was extremely shocking. No one had thought that the battle would end so quickly. It should be known that in a battle between two mortal metamorphosis cultivators, even if one side had a great advantage, the outcome could not be determined in a short period of time. It would almost take a dozen or even dozens of years until one side exhausted all of their vitality and died. However, Ju Rong was killed by a punch in front of them. It simply overturned everyone's understanding of the past. At this moment, at the place where Ju Rong disappeared, a hole suddenly appeared. It pulled everything in its surroundings in, and just now, it had disappeared. Someone exclaimed, "A mysterious void hole. Could it be that Ju Rong is really dead?" Someone who did not believe it retorted, "How is that possible? Didn't Ju Rong still have the flesh possession technique? Even if his physical body was destroyed here, he would be able to come back to life somewhere else. Moreover, Ju Rong still had the root fruit to avoid the calamity. Just now, they had only exchanged one move. No matter how powerful this Zhang Shangzhen was, how could he know where Ju Rong was? How can you kill Ju Rong just like that?" The previous person had nothing to say. Under normal circumstances, when a person like Ju Rong encountered a life and death crisis, the root fruit would automatically appear, allowing him to avoid the calamity. However, the root fruit had not appeared from the beginning to the end, so it was clear that he should not have died. However, the reality was that this person's soul had been destroyed, so it did not make sense. At this moment, There were many people who were confused like him. However, they did not know that although Zhu Rong did not use the root fruit when he appeared, it did not mean that the shadows of the future did not use it. Moreover, they did not use it once, but countless times, which allowed Zhang Yan to take the opportunity to find where Zhu Rong was. However, the truly terrifying thing was that Zhu Rong did not know all of this. This was the power of the divine contract. Even if your future was completely taken away, your current body would not know. In the end, you could only obediently accept death, unless you cut off your past and future body, or if you were above it. Obviously, Zhu Rong had not reached this realm. Everyone in the field was discussing spiritually. However, those who had not reached this realm and had not personally experienced it could only make guesses, and it was difficult for them to truly understand the mystery. Perhaps those with great mediums who had cut off their past and future bodies would be able to sense the various changes here, but at this moment, other than the Xianyang Heaven Lord, who was nowhere to be found, there was no one with such cultivation. At this moment, in an extremely quiet cave, a beautiful female Taoist was sitting cross-legged. In front of her, there was a jade altar about 3 feet tall, and on top of it was a piece of flesh. It was originally moving slowly like a living thing, but suddenly, the vitality on it seemed to be sucked out in an instant, and it turned into a grayish-white stone. After a few breaths, it turned into a pile of debris. The female Taoist opened her eyes and looked at the piece of flesh. Her face was filled with shock and uncertainty. She performed a spell and instantly revealed a sorrowful and angry expression. She said, "My son has the self as heart thread that I gave him. If he is in danger, there will be an omen. How could he be killed?" She gritted her teeth and turned into a gust of wind to leave, but halfway there, a layer of jade green barrier appeared out of nowhere in front of her, and she was forcefully blocked. This female Taoist seemed to not give up, and she kept charging. The location of her cave was originally buried deep in the ground, and there were several mountains above it. However, her actions caused the mountains to shake, and the rumbling sound traveled for 1,000 miles. A clear light flashed, and a middle-aged cultivator in green with a slightly weathered face landed in front of the mountain. He said in a dialect to the people below, "Junior sister, what are you doing? Are you trying to make Master angry again?" The female Taoist saw his arrival, and she stopped what she was doing. She said sorrowfully, "Senior brother, just now that my son is dead, I just want to go out and ask for an explanation." The middle-aged cultivator looked at her, and after some calculations, he knew the reason. He sighed and said, "You don't want to ask for an explanation, but you want to go out and get revenge." The female Taoist's face revealed a ferocious expression, and she said, "Yes, I want to go out and get revenge. I also want to ask Juyu how he took care of my high heir." The middle-aged cultivator sighed and said, "Back then, Master said that Zhu Rong acted recklessly, and one day he would meet with misfortune. Junior sister didn't think much of it at that time, but unexpectedly, Master was right." The female Taoist said with resentment, "I don't dare to blame Master, but if he didn't imprison me there, I would definitely discipline my son well, and I wouldn't let him go out and cause trouble." The middle-aged cultivator shook his head. He knew his junior sister's temperament too well. If he let her go out, things would only get worse. The female Taoist begged, "Senior brother, can you help me find out who harmed my son?" The middle-aged cultivator resolutely refused, "I won't do that, that will only harm you. Junior sister, as long as you give up this demonic technique, Master will definitely let you out. By then, if there's anything, you can do it yourself." The female Taoist snorted, took a few steps back, and looked over coldly. "Senior brother, don't try to persuade me, I definitely won't give up this technique." The middle-aged cultivator said in a deep voice, "Junior sister, Master wants you to be calm, you better cultivate here." With that, he turned and was about to leave. The female Taoist suddenly called out to him, "Senior brother, wait." She took another step forward and took out a jade pendant. "Junior sister can't get out, please give this to Juyu." The middle-aged cultivator frowned and said, "Junior sister, why do you have to do this?" The female Taoist said coldly, "Senior brother, are you going to help or not?" The middle-aged cultivator was silent for a moment, and in the end, he said, "This is the last thing I can do for you." The female Taoist bowed and said coldly, "Thank you, senior brother, I won't dare to trouble senior brother in the future." The middle-aged cultivator sighed, and with a wave of his hand, he took the jade pendant, and it turned into clear air, drifting away without a trace. Soon a month passed. At this time, once the news of Zhu Rong's death spread in the Yuhuan heavens, it immediately caused a huge uproar. Who was Zhu Rong? Almost everyone in the Yuhuan heavens knew about him. His battle prowess wasn't supreme, but with the backing behind him, he had always been unscrupulous, and few dared to provoke him. Unexpectedly, he was killed this time, and it was said that he died on the spot with a single punch, and his soul was destroyed. When people first heard about this, they thought it was a heavenly lord who did it, but later they learned that this person came from outside the Yuhuan heavens, and was suspected to be a direct disciple of the great underworld patriarch. Only such a person wouldn't be afraid of the person behind Zhu Rong. After this battle, many sects had already started to secretly pay attention to Zhang Yan, and they had placed him within the range that they could not afford to provoke. However, at the same time, there were also many people who had strange thoughts and sent him invitations. In the Luo Mountain Monastery in Xianhong Heaven, Taoist Gong was also shocked when he heard the news. He was very clear about Zhu Rong's divine abilities, and even he wasn't a match for him in a head-on fight, but Zhang Yan could kill him in one move, which meant that it wouldn't be difficult to take him down. But he thought that as long as he didn't leave Xianhong Heaven, he would be fine. But he was a little angry that Zhu Rong had leaked the information, but it had already happened, and there was no point in being upset. He could only think of a way to save Zhu Rong. Fortunately, it wasn't that he didn't consider the possibility of failure. After all, Zhang Yan came under the guidance of the great underworld patriarch. How could he not have a trump card or two? He sneered, "There are many people behind Zhu Rong, especially Zhu Zhutian Heaven Lord Zhuyu. He's not a person who's easy to talk to. His son was killed, he can't just sit and watch. Even if Taoist Zhang can escape from him, he won't have time to come to Xianhong Heaven." At this time, Zhang Yan and Taoist Tong Hai had already returned to Tambua's small world. After he killed Zhu Rong, Taoist Qi Chang no longer talked about the bet, and directly handed over his disciple. Taoist Tong Hai was overjoyed, but at the same time, he blamed himself. If he hadn't come to observe, perhaps Zhang Yan would have been able to avoid Zhu Rong. With a worried expression, he said, "The person behind Zhu Rong might come looking for trouble with fellow Taoist. Fellow Taoist, be careful when you come down." Zhang Yan lightly nodded his head. This was only natural. Before he acted, he had already made preparations in his heart. Although Zhu Rong had the support of a supreme existence, he had offended even more people. This time around, if he killed this person, Zhang Yan's reputation would definitely spread out and he would be able to achieve his goal even faster. In any case, the pros of this matter outweighed the cons. With his current realm, if there was danger, he would be able to sense it. If there was danger, he could avoid it in advance. Moreover, the place he was going to was Qinghua Heaven. As long as he obtained a demon subjugation edict there, he wouldn't have to worry about external enemies for the time being. The Green Jade Palace had decreed that if a force or cultivator had a demon subjugation edict, no one could do anything to them within the time limit set in the edict. In the past, many cultivators who offended their enemies did the same, and Zhu Rong was no exception. And Zhang Yan was originally prepared to make a name for himself. With this layer of protection, he could avoid a lot of trouble. Chapter 1524. After Zhang Yan returned to Tambua sect, he did not pay attention to the disturbances outside and continued to deduce the unfinished cultivation method. He was already close to the final juncture, and this time he focused all his attention on it. It only took him 2 months to complete it. Not only that, but even his own Taishan True technique had greater gains, and his understanding of its changes had deepened. At this step, the feeling from last time had appeared again, but this time it was different. It seemed that as long as he thought about it, he could see a magical technique. He thought about it. Although the Taishan True technique was deduced by himself, it was still an evolution from the Taishan sect. There was an inseparable connection between the two, and the feeling he had was likely a legacy left behind by the mighty figures of the Taishan sect for their descendants. Perhaps all the descendants of the Taishan sect who had cultivated to this level could come into contact with it. If he chose to accept it at this moment, he might be involved, but it could also bring trouble. The best result here was nothing more than obtaining a cultivation method, but the other side was likely to notice his existence, which would bring unpredictable risks. But now, with the Patriarch's divine item in front of him, he did not need to do this at all. He only needed to improve his strength step by step. Therefore, in his cultivation, he deliberately avoided that place and decided to wait until the appropriate time in the future to come into contact with it. He raised his hand, and a beam of spiritual light shot out, recording the cultivation method in a jade scroll. He then waved his sleeve and came out of seclusion. He stepped into the matrix door and came to where Zhenren Tongguang was cultivating. At the door, someone reported to him, and not long after, the guard came back and said, "The sect leader invites Zhang Shangzhen inside." Zhang Yan nodded and stepped on a jade wave. In an instant, his body merged with the water, and after a few turns, he reappeared above a river. He looked up and saw Taoist Tongguang waiting there. He bowed and said, "Greetings, Taoist Tongguang." Taoist Tongguang returned the greeting and invited him into the inner room. After they sat down, he said with a smile, "A few days ago, I saw the spirit pool slowly surging and clear light sprinkling down. This is a great auspicious sign, and I am afraid it will fall on you." Zhang Yan smiled and took out the jade scroll. He handed it over with both hands and said, "I did not disappoint you." Taoist Tongguang's expression became serious. He stood up from his seat and took it with both hands. He returned to his seat, and his consciousness turned inside. He read the cultivation method once, and his eyes could not help but reveal a look of joy. He nodded and said, "Wonderful, wonderful." The cultivation method that Zhang Yan evolved paid special attention to the foundation, but it did not have a high requirement for aptitude at the beginning. The threshold was much lower than other cultivation methods. However, this did not mean that this cultivation method was not brilliant. Instead, it went from shallow to deep. As long as one had enough patience and perseverance to cultivate, they would not achieve great results, but at least their cultivation would not be too low. The most important point was that this cultivation method was of the same origin as the cultivation methods of Tanbua sect. When the disciples cultivated halfway, even if they switched to other cultivation methods, there would not be any hindrance, and the choices they had would be much greater. Taoist Tongguang praised, "Just this one cultivation method can make a sect flourish." Zhang Yan shook his head and said, "Sect leader Tongguang is too kind." He was able to do this because the cultivation methods of the Tanbua sect were rare to begin with. There were only a few left and right, and they were all of similar attributes. If it were the 5 skills of the Qigong sect, it would be extremely difficult to achieve this. Taoist Tongguang was in a good mood and said, "Taoist Zhang, there is no need to be modest. With this cultivation method, the future path of my Tanbua sect's disciples will be greatly broadened. My sect is indebted to you." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Since this matter is done, I will also take my leave." Taoist Tongguang urged, "The waves outside have not calmed down, why don't Taoist Zhang stay a few more days?" Zhang Yan said, "There is no need. Now that the outside world knows that I am in Tanbua sect, I am afraid that staying will bring trouble to your side." Taoist Tongguang smiled and said, "My Tanbua sect also has the protection of the talisman left by the founder, so we are not afraid of external enemies. However, I see that Taoist Zhang has other plans. Since you have decided to leave, then I will not stay any longer." He reached into his sleeve and took out a jade talisman. He handed it over. "If Taoist Zhang needs anything in the future, just bring this item to me. My Tanbua sect will definitely help." Zhang Yan accepted it gladly, thanked him, and got up to leave. After coming out of the cave abode, he went back to make some preparations. On the second day, he set off for Qinghua Heaven. Taoist Tongguang came to send him off on the orders of Taoist Tongguang. He said, "Taoist Zhang, how do you want to deal with the Luoshan Monastery's betrayal?" Zhang Yan said concisely, "The time is not right." Taoist Tongguang immediately had a plan. He said, Zhu Rong spread the news of you being the owner of the divine object, which is very disadvantageous to Taoist Zhang. Perhaps someone is stirring up trouble behind the scenes. Zhang Yan understood that Zhu Rong hinted that he was the owner of the divine object in front of everyone. This was actually harboring evil intentions. It would definitely attract many people to covet him or use him to achieve some kind of goal. Taoist Tongguang's worry was not without reason. However, he didn't care. If this matter was known by outsiders, many people would have designs on him. But with the great underworld patriarch's guidance, it was actually beneficial for him to do things in the future. Right now, he didn't plan to retrieve the object. For the time being, no one would get it. But when he was strong enough, he wouldn't have to worry about these things anymore. Before that, Luoshan Monastery would look after the divine object for him, so he didn't have to worry about it being lost at all. After bidding farewell to Tongguang, he walked to the front of the skyscraping spirit boat. Rin Ji was already waiting there. He bowed respectfully and said, "Disciple greets Shang Zhen." Zhang Yan nodded and said, "Follow me onto the boat." Rin Ji nodded and followed. Just now, when he stepped into the boat, he was surprised to find that it was a vast world. There were mountains in the distance, and there were beasts on the plains. If he didn't know that he was inside the boat, he would have thought that he was in a small world. Zhang Yan said, "Your cultivation level is still low. You have to focus on the cultivation technique I passed down to you." Rin Ji replied seriously, "Disciple has been diligent in cultivation every day. I have never slacked off." He was a rogue cultivator, and he usually had to pay many times more than the disciples of the sects in order to obtain external objects and techniques. Now that he was able to follow by the side of an almighty being, how could he not cherish this kind of opportunity? Zhang Yan nodded and said, "You have a strong will and indomitable spirit. This is why I chose you. If there's anything, someone will call you." At this moment, a maid came up and said, "Perfected one, please follow me." Rin Ji bowed to Zhang Yan again and left with the maid. Zhang Yan returned to the inner chamber and drove the skyscraping boat toward the myriad empty realm ring. He purposely hid the boat and all his aura so that his whereabouts wouldn't be discovered by others and cause unnecessary trouble. After a while, the boat approached the myriad empty realm ring. Now that he was here, he couldn't go there silently anymore. However, he didn't need to hide anymore. But at this moment, he suddenly felt that no matter whether it was the people or the objects around him, everything had suddenly stopped moving. They maintained the same motion, and it was as if they were embedded in a painting. At the same time, an aura enveloped him. This wasn't the first time he had encountered this aura. It had appeared when he was fighting Zhu Rong that day. He looked up and saw a Taoist appearing in front of the boat. He thought for a moment and appeared from the boat. He put his sleeves behind his back and said, "Which Taoist is here?" The Taoist bowed and replied, "Zhang Shangzhen, I am a disciple of Xian Yang Heaven's Heavenly Lord. Now that Shangzhen wishes to leave my place, I have come under the Heavenly Lord's orders to give Shangzhen a gift." He raised his hand and a jade leaf flew over. Zhang Yan took it and saw that there was a strand of consciousness on it. When he swept it down, the jade leaf shattered. His eyes flashed and he looked up. He said, "Please help me thank Xian Yang Heaven Lord for his kindness." The Taoist bowed again and turned to leave. Soon he disappeared. Zhang Yan pondered for a while and returned to the boat. He activated his mana and turned into a beam of clear light, flying into the realm ring. The moment he left, everything in the myriad empty realm ring returned to normal. Just now, no one noticed what happened. Holding Wang Tian, Tribulation Heart Cave. Heavenly Daughter Han Xiaorua wore a white gauze gown with no accessories. She stood on a pure jade crystal platform and spoke to a rainbow-colored beam of light. "Mother, since that person is the true master of the divine item, if we plan a trap, we might be able to obtain the divine item through this person." A slim figure appeared in the rainbow and said, "It's not a good time to get in touch with Taoist Zhang." Han Xiaorua was puzzled. "Mother, what?" Everyone is getting restless and has their own plans. Even if Taoist Zhang is powerful, he's only one person. If I'm late, the god item might fall into someone else's hands. The figure in the rainbow said, It's not that simple. Before Zhang Shangzhen gets the god item, we can't do anything. Han Xiaohua was reluctant and said, "Mother." The figure in the rainbow light waved his hand and said in a deep voice, "My son, you need to know that the divine item left behind by the great underworld ancestral master is rumored to be able to help one reach that realm. However, if someone can really reach that realm, the Green Jade Palace might not ignore it." Han Xiaoxiao's heart trembled, and she suddenly realized that the palace master of Green Jade Palace was at the peak of all heavens, and as the only true young almighty, he might not wish for another person of the same generation to appear in the heavens. This was a very simple logic, but before she was reminded, she didn't even have the slightest thought of thinking about this. This was an extremely abnormal situation, as if someone had deliberately concealed her consciousness. Thinking of this, she couldn't help but feel a chill in her heart, and she said with a trembling voice, "Mother." A voice came from the rainbow again. "You don't need to be afraid. In the eyes of that person, you and I are so insignificant. He won't deliberately target us, but you need to know when to stop. At this time, you can't be the one to take the lead. You just need to quietly wait for fate and the fate." Han Xiaohua realized that the situation was too deep. It wasn't time for her to get involved. Thus, she knelt and said, "I will obey Mother's orders." Chapter 1525. After Zhang Yan passed through the world ring, he instantly felt that he had barged into a vast qi dynamic. This qi dynamic was boundless, and the whole world was under it. The skyscraping boat seemed to have encountered a great pressure. Its speed suddenly slowed down and was only 10 to 20% of its original speed, and it was still decreasing. Not only that, even his body seemed to be wrapped in a layer of thick clothes, as if there was some kind of barrier between him and this world. He had expected this situation, so he landed the boat and anchored it on a barren high mountain. In the Yuhuan heavens, Qinghua heaven was different from where he was. It was known as the 100 Realms Mix, 10,000 ruins hide emptiness. The big and small worlds intersected and were not clearly divided. However, this did not mean that cultivators could come and go as they pleased. Instead, there were more restrictions than other places. In some aspects, it could even be said to be the world with the most rules among the heavens. For example, most cultivators who entered this world for the first time could not fly. According to the rules set by the Green Jade Palace, if they did not want to be restricted, they could only slowly accumulate karma points. There were many ways to earn karma points, such as slaying demons and devils, helping people in danger, and even imparting Taoism. There were also many details to pay attention to. Usually, a practitioner needed to accumulate tens of thousands of karma points to be able to fly freely. However, this did not mean that they could do whatever they wanted. If a cultivator did evil, their previous karma points would be taken away, and they would still be beaten down to the mortal world unless they left this world. However, it was easy to enter, but difficult to leave. This was because once a cultivator entered this world, his divine sense and Taoist arts would be restricted by the Weili. If he wanted to use them, he would need to accumulate karma points and release the restrictions layer by layer until he had enough karma points. It was said that this was a divine sense performed by the palace master of Green Jade Palace. Therefore, there were no loopholes to take advantage of. Through this semi-forced method, most cultivators could only walk on the ground obediently and even mix in the mortal world. However, it was not without benefits. If you had enough karma points, you could even directly use the divine sense that Green Jade Palace gave you, or even exchange it for good magic treasures and elixirs. This also created a unique scene in this world. The more karma points a cultivator had, the more tricks he could use. If two cultivators had similar cultivation, they might not be able to win in other places, but here, the one with more karma points would definitely win. Rumor had it that the Green Jade Palace was doing this to deal with the demons from the outer realms. Most of the foreign enemies who had invaded the remnant heavens had entered the Green Jade Heaven. Due to this method, the demons that had just entered the Green Jade Heaven could not display much of their abilities. Even ordinary people who had a rough understanding of the Qi refinement Tao could fight against them as long as they had Dharma treasures and talismans passed down by cultivators. After understanding it, Zhang Yan thought that Green Jade Palace's intention was not so simple. There must be a deeper purpose. He believed that he was not the only one who had noticed this. Many people had also noticed it. However, the gap between them and the mighty figures of True Yang was too big, so there was no need for them to delve deeper into the secret, because it was meaningless. Even if they knew everything, they would not be able to change anything. He stretched out his hand and slightly clenched his fist. For a cultivator of his level, because he had already found the root and fruit and formed his own heaven, it was impossible for his magic power to be completely restrained. However, if he were to forcefully use it, the consumption would be several times or even more than 10 times than before. If he were to fight someone with a similar level of cultivation at this time, he would definitely be at a great disadvantage. However, there was one difference between him and others. Although his Qi refinement was like this, his body of strength could be replenished by an endless stream of inexplicable items that came from across space. At most, he could not increase his strength by himself during a battle, so it did not affect his fighting ability in this aspect. However, now that he was here, he did not want to show off too much, so he took out a shining talisman from his sleeve. Generally speaking, cultivators with mortal transformation cultivation were all mighty figures of a region. They did not need to walk step by step like other low-level cultivators. They only needed to send a talisman over, and Green Jade Palace would remove the restraints for them and allow them to use the many formation doors in the heavenly world to travel. However, the prerequisite for this was that they must be from the Yuhuan heavens. If they were not, they would need at least a mighty cultivator to introduce them. When he left Tanbua sect, Taoist Tong Guang had given him a referral talisman. At this moment, it came in handy. He used his Dharma to lift it and let it fly into the sky. Then he sat down and waited for news. In the blink of an eye, 10 days had passed. However, Zhang Yan felt that something was wrong. He had asked Taoist Tong Guang before. After the referral talisman was sent, there would be a result in 5 or 6 days at most. Even if they were not willing to remove the restraints on him, there would definitely be a reply to explain the reason. However, there was no movement at all. Perhaps there was some unforeseen event here. It was more likely that someone had tampered with the talisman, so the talisman did not successfully reach Green Jade Palace. He thought about it. If it was the latter possibility, then the other party might have a backup plan. He could not just sit here and wait. Since this method did not work, then he could only do it step by step. The Demon Demand Edict could only be obtained at the Golden Hall of Imperial Edict. To get there, one had to pass through the formation door that Green Jade Palace had set up beforehand. However, the cultivators who returned first had to sacrifice a sufficient number of demons and accumulate a certain amount of karma points before they could use this place. However, with his status, there was no need for him to do it himself. He only needed to instruct his subordinates. With a flick of his finger, a ray of spiritual light shot out. Not long after, Renji came to the front of the seat and bowed. He said, "What instructions do you have for me, master?" Zhang Yan said, "This time, you and Chu Zhao will go out together. There is no need for you to do anything else. Just focus on killing demons and saving lives. When the time is right, I will call you back." Renji did not question further. He immediately replied, "Yes, master." In reality, with Chu Zhao's ability, it was very easy for him to do these things. However, he was still a demon. If there was no one to control him, many people would immediately come to take him in for the sake of karma points. In the Great Bitter Plains, a long caravan was walking on the wasteland against the strong wind. Most of the caravans were demons such as rhinoceroses and oxen. At the front of the caravan was a tall old man. Although his hair and beard were silver, his eyes were sharp and his steps were steady. It was obvious that he still had an extraordinary physique. After a long time, seeing that the wind was getting weaker, he spat out the sand and stones in his mouth. He pulled a horse over and untied his water skin. He removed the stopper from his mouth and drank a mouthful of water. He then asked a Taoist beside him, Imperial advisor, where are we now? The Taoist said, let me see. He took out a piece of talisman paper and waved it in the air. Then, he took out a porcelain bowl filled with clear water and soaked the talisman in it. After a while, a few golden words appeared on the surface of the bowl. He lifted his head and said happily, Leader Zhao, we are almost there. After we cross this call, we will reach the Qi altar in at most half a month's journey. The old man who was addressed as team leader Zhao also showed joy in his eyes. He raised his voice and shouted to the tired people behind him, get your spirits up and work harder. Once we get past this mountain, we'll reach Formation City. Because the group was too long, it required people to pass the words down one by one. However, when everyone heard those words, their spirits were greatly uplifted, and they roared in unison. The originally dispirited and listless group suddenly glowed with vigor. The Taoist reached into his pouch and took out a bottle of fine wine as well as several plump and moist red fruits. Then he began to eat them. The few people following behind him were all envious and jealous. A man who looked like a manager came to Leader Zhao's side and stared at the pouch. He whispered, Leader, if we had such an item, why would we need to transport it in a big cart? Can we ask for it? Leader Zhao was knowledgeable. He shook his head and said, don't think too much. This kind of celestial treasure can only be activated with mana. Even if you give it to us, no one will be able to move it. Moreover, the pouch can only hold half of the caravan. It is not as useful as you think. When the manager heard this, he could not help but say that it was a pity. The Taoist drank a few mouthfuls of wine and felt comfortable all over. His tiredness was also swept away. He also heard the conversation between the two and put away the wine bottle again. He said with a smile, Leader Zhao is right and wrong. For example, the thing in my hand can only hold half of the caravan. However, the Qianquan pouch in the hands of the superior cultivators can easily hold the whole caravan. The manager's eyes lit up and he said, I wonder how many karma points such an item would cost. In the Qinghua heaven, mortals could also have karma points. However, they mostly used them to exchange for things that were useful to them, such as weapons, talismans, and magic weapons. Pills and external medicine were the most common things that could be exchanged. The Taoist calculated and said casually, 1,000,000 karma points. The manager was shocked and then said dejectedly, 1,000,000 karma points. I'm afraid only the relatives of the nobles in the imperial court can gather that much. The Taoist was about to say something when his expression suddenly changed. His nose twitched and he said, what a strong demonic qi. There are demons here. Quickly stop and guard. Just as he was speaking, black smoke suddenly rose from the ground around him, covering the sky. Then, the sand was lifted, and one after another, ape-like monsters with rat faces crawled out. However, most of them were skin and bones, and their eye sockets were sunken. It was obvious that they hadn't eaten for a long time. Leader Zhao reacted very quickly and shouted, form the caravan formation and quickly take out the protective jade stone. This situation came without warning, but few people panicked. It seemed that they had long been accustomed to this situation. As soon as the order was given, everyone took out flat stones that were the size of golden melons and hit them with mallets. Suddenly, a ray of light bloomed and covered the caravan. Under the dark sky, the whole caravan was like a long dragon with a shining back. The Taoist looked around and frowned. These are earth monkeys. There are quite a lot of them. That's strange. How could there be so many monsters lying in ambush so close to the altar? Suddenly, he saw a Taoist leading a double-headed bull on the opposite hill. His eyes lit up and he said loudly, I wonder which fellow Taoist is here. I'm Wei Song from Riding Cloud Ridge. I'm escorting the medicine team here. I hope you can help me. Chapter 1526. In the Qinghua heaven, at the edge of the Qiong ruins, a giant man who was 100 feet tall was sitting on a broken cauldron. He seemed to be resting with his eyes closed. There was a short horn on his forehead, but there was no demonic qi on his body. It was obvious that he was half demon and half human. In front of him, there were many demon skulls piled up high. There was a large golden axe on top of them, which made him look extremely ferocious and bloody. Suddenly, he felt a surge of chi in the pouch on his waist. His expression changed and he took out a jade bead. He threw it out and a spiritual light rose from the ground. After a short while, he saw a cold-faced Taoist appear in the room. He looked at him and said, "It's Taoist Li. Why are you looking for me?" Taoist Li bowed to him and said, "Taoist Jiang, the Taoist Zhang who killed your senior brother came to my Qinghua heaven a few days ago. I stopped his referral talisman. He is now in a certain place and can't move forward or retreat." The giant man suddenly looked up, stared at him and asked, "Really?" Then he asked, "Where is this person now?" A few months ago, when he received the news of Zhu Rong's death, he didn't rush back to avenge him. Instead, he paid a great price to ask someone familiar in the heavens to pay attention to the whereabouts of this person. He didn't expect to receive news so soon. Taoist Li smiled and didn't answer. The giant man thought for a while and asked in a deep voice, "What do you want?" Taoist Li said calmly, "I heard that Jiang Shangzhen has a Jiahan lamp from the Thunder Ruins. If you can give it to me, I will tell you the whereabouts of Taoist Jiang. How about it?" The giant man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he fell into deep thought. After a long time, he said, "Where can I give it to you?" Seeing that he agreed, Taoist Li's eyes were filled with joy, and even his tone became faster. He said, "You can send this to the evil punishing mountain, and I will tell you where he is. However, you need to know that I can only delay it for you for a year at most. If it takes any longer, I won't be able to do anything. Otherwise, this matter will involve my family." The giant surnamed Jiang furrowed his brows and said, "I can't get away for the time being. Fellow Taoist Zhua and I have already done this, so why can't you delay it a little longer?" Taoist Li shook his head and said, "How can it be so simple? The crime of stealing the charm of recommendation is not small. Every month I will be deducted 1,000,000 karma points. Moreover, after this matter, there will be people who will investigate and I will be punished separately. If I obstruct them for a year, I think I can still bear it. If it drags on, I am afraid I will be in danger of being demoted from the mortal world." The giant surnamed Jiang pondered for a moment, then said decisively, "All right, I'll definitely rush back within a year. However, fellow Taoist Li, please do your best to delay. If my karma points are deducted, I'll find a way to compensate you." Taoist Li said, "It looks like fellow Taoist Jiang found something good in the ruined lands again." The giant surnamed Jiang didn't deny it and said, "I did gain something." Taoist Li's eyes brightened. "I hope you won't make things too difficult for me." After he finished speaking, his figure instantly disappeared, and the jade bead that contained the aura also turned into fragments. The giant surnamed Jiang stretched out his hand, grabbed the gold-copper axe that was resting on the pile of demon skulls, and lifted it up. At this moment, a flame suddenly flew over from the sky, and after a few breaths, it landed not far away with a loud boom, creating a huge pit. A burly cultivator climbed out of the pit, cupped his fists and said excitedly, "Fellow Taoist Jiang, we've killed a total of 3,237 demons from the Luo Yao tribe this time. If we send them back, we'll be able to get at least 30,000,000 karma points. If we can slaughter 2 more tribes, we'll be able to gather 10,000,000 karma points." The giant surnamed Jiang looked at him and said, "Fellow Taoist Jin, I need to return to the heavenly hall for a while. I'm afraid I won't be able to travel with you." The cultivator surnamed Jin was startled, and asked anxiously, "Why? Among us, fellow Taoist cultivation is the highest, and you have the most karma points. Without fellow Taoist, the rest of us won't be able to destroy those 2 demon tribes." The giant surnamed Jiang said in a deep voice, "This time, I've let you down. If I can return, I'll definitely try to make up for your losses." The cultivator surnamed Jin noticed something was wrong with his tone, and looked at him, and asked tentatively, "Is it about Shangzhen Zhu Rong?" The giant surnamed Jiang was silent for a while, and then said, "That's right." The cultivator surnamed Jin let out a breath, and said, "Please forgive me for speaking bluntly, that Taoist Zhang is very powerful, and even Shangzhen Zhu Rong is no match for him. Although Shang Xinjiang's magic power is not weak, how can he defeat this person? The giant surnamed Jiang waved the gold-copper axe in his hand and said, "No, if it's somewhere else, I'm indeed no match for this person, but in the Qinghua heaven, I may not lose." This person is actually in the Qinghua heaven? The cultivator surnamed Jin's expression changed. This is indeed a good opportunity. The giant surnamed Jiang nodded and said, "So I have to go. If I miss this opportunity, I don't know when I'll get another one like this." The battle in the Qinghua heaven was different from other places. Not only did it depend on the strength of both sides, but also the accumulation of karma points. Zhang Yan was an extraterrestrial cultivator who had just entered the Qinghua heaven, so it was hard to say how much of his strength he could use. However, the giant surnamed Jiang had accumulated a large number of karma points over the past thousands of years, and even some sect leaders of large sects could not compare to him. At this moment, not only could he display his full strength, but he could also borrow the divine sense of the Green Jade Palace, so he had a much higher chance of winning here. The cultivator said seriously, "Fellow Jiang, if there's anything you need us to do, please let us know." However, the giant surnamed Jiang refused. That Taoist Jiang also has a great background, so don't get involved in this matter. Besides, if I find this person, I won't go alone. He took a deep breath, and the big axe instantly turned into a golden light and flew into his nose aperture. He then said, "That person may leave at any time, so I can't delay for too long. I'll leave now. Everyone be careful." After saying that, he leaped up and turned into a golden light that pierced through the sky. On the Great Suffering Plain, Ren Ji and Chu Zhao were ordered by Zhang Yan to go out and try to obtain karma points. Because they couldn't fly, they walked for a long time before they encountered a pack. Coincidentally, they saw that the pack was besieged by demons and heard someone calling for help, so they didn't hesitate anymore. They took out a stack of talisman from their sleeves and scattered it above them. Instantly, it turned into golden light that fell down. Because of the restriction of this world, he couldn't use any divine sense or Taoist arts, but it didn't mean that he couldn't use the celestial device talisman. Wherever the golden light passed, it only took a moment to sweep through the whole area, killing all the demons, leaving only piles of broken flesh and blood. The black smoke that was formed by the billowing demonic qi in the sky also gradually dispersed. Seeing this scene, Wei Song couldn't help but be shocked. He thought, this person's talisman is so powerful, but he didn't fly. It's very likely that he's a perfected person who just entered this place. He whispered a few words to Captain Zhao, then stood up and bowed. Wei Song greets Superior Cultivator. "May I ask how I should address you, Superior Cultivator?" Ren Ji glanced at him and saw that he was only at the mystic light realm, but he didn't look down on him because of this. He also bowed and said, "I am Ren Ji." He then pointed at the two-headed bull demon beside him. "This is Chu Zhao, who is traveling with me." Wei Song hurriedly bowed to Chu Zhao. Although the latter was only a bull demon, it was very normal for some cultivators to have demon servants following them. Chu Zhao looked at the corpses of the demons and blew out a puff of smoke from his nostrils. He said, "You guys are really unlucky. These earth monkeys have been hiding here for at least 100 years. If no one came here, they would have starved to death in 100 or so days. It's because they smelled your scent that they couldn't help but come out just now. If we didn't happen to pass by, you guys would have been in trouble." A young man who was about 13 or 14 years old was slightly unconvinced. He took out a few talismans and waved them. He said, "Superior Cultivator, it's not like we can't fight back." Chu Zhao shook his head and said, "Your talismans can only kill normal demons, but there's a Demon King here. Those things are useless." "What? Demon King?" Wei Song and Captain Zhao's faces turned pale with shock, and a lingering fear surged in their hearts. A Demon King required at least a nascent soul stage cultivator to deal with. If there really was one here, no one would be able to withstand it. The demons and evil in Qinghua heaven were greatly suppressed. Mortals could fight against them with the help of magic tools and talismans. This was also the reason why they were confident in crossing the wilderness. However, this was also limited. After all, mortals could only do so much. Even if demons could not use their magic and could not fly, they still had strong bodies. Even if the Demon King was at the end of his life, it would not be difficult for him to kill all of them. After the two learned the truth, they hurriedly bowed again to thank him. Rinji expressed that it was no big deal and asked, "Where are you going?" Captain Zhao said, "We're all from Zhuoqing. We're here to escort these precious materials and external medicine to the Eastern Secret Grand Temple of Zhishan country. We're already halfway there. Thanks to Master Wei's escort, we were able to arrive here smoothly." Because mortals in Qinghua Heaven also had a certain degree of self-protection, they were responsible for picking precious materials and external medicine. However, they could not fly, so they could only use the most basic method, relying on people to carry beasts to transport them from one array gate to another. If cultivators were to escort them at this time, they would be able to accumulate a lot of karma points. Ren-ji nodded and said, "Do you know what kind of demons appear here?" Wei Song hesitated for a moment, then cupped his hands and said, "May I ask, Superior Cultivator, are you going out to travel and accumulate karma points?" Ren-ji said frankly, "To be honest, this is the first time I've arrived here, so I'm going out to travel." Wei Song hurriedly said, "Please forgive me for saying too much. If we're talking about the speed of accumulating karma points, nothing can compare to those ruined lands. Not only can you find treasures there, but you can also kill demons. Killing one demon will be worth at least tens of thousands of karma points. Due to my shallow cultivation, I can't go there, but with your abilities, you too can go there." Rin-ji's expression brightened, and he asked telepathically, "Is that so, fellow cultivator Chu?" Chu Ban said, "I've traveled with the old master for thousands of years, and the rules have long changed. However, those ruined lands are countless in size, and each is different. Some of them are dangerous places, and even powerful cultivators may not be able to enter and exit safely. As the saying goes, fortune comes from danger, and what this person said is true." Rinji said, "No matter how dangerous it is, can it withstand Zhang Shangzhen's supernatural power? We need to go back and inform Shangzhen of this as soon as possible." Chapter 1527. After listening to Wei Song's words, Rinji realized that there might be more ways to earn karma points than he had imagined, and that it was not necessary to kill demons in the wilderness. However, the latter's cultivation was limited, and there were many things that could not be explained clearly. After some consideration, he decided to find a way to understand more, so he and Chu Ban escorted the caravan all the way to the Qi altar. The two of them stayed in the altar for a few days, and managed to gather a lot of information. After a discussion, they set off. Just now, not long after they left, a grand breeze blew past them and arrived in front of them. The two of them were immediately on guard. The breeze dispersed, and a smiling Taoist appeared. He bowed to them and said, "Please don't be alarmed. I have no ill intentions. I only came here to ask you a question. Is this your first time here?" Rinji asked warily, "May I know who you are?" The Taoist replied, "I am Gong Shu, the altar master of the Qi altar. Before this, I was subduing demons. Just now, when I came back, I heard that you were here. I love to make friends, so I wanted to come and meet you." Rinji did not believe his words. He cupped his hands and said, "So it's Altar Master Gong. We haven't been here for long. What can I do for you?" The Taoist smiled and said, "I see that you too have an extraordinary background, and you want to know about karma points. I am afraid that you are in a difficult situation. I can point out a way for you." With a wave of his hand, a jade slip appeared out of thin air, and he handed it over. "Can the two of you take this item and let the esteemed one have a look at it?" With that said, he didn't wait for the two of them to reply. He cupped his hands once more, and then disappeared without a trace. Rinji took the jade scroll. He thought for a moment and said, "Zhenren Chu, what do you think?" Chu Ban said, "This Taoist Qi is unstable, so it should be a doppelganger. However, this person did come from Dharma City, so his background is not fake. There may be some other reason for him to come here. It is better to bring this item back and let the master decide." Renji agreed as well. He immediately retraced his steps and traveled day and night. 10 days later, he returned to the skyscraping dermic boat. When he saw Zhang Yan, he reported everything that had happened and presented the jade slip to him. Zhang Yan took the jade slip and entered it with his consciousness. There were many ways to earn karma points, but one of them was mentioned. If a cultivator was in danger and did not have any karma points, he could make a vow to the heavens and owe karma points. Not only would he be able to remove the shackles, but he would also be able to regain his strength. He would also be given many benefits in advance. However, he would have to serve the Green Jade Palace for a period of 100 to 1,000 years. He smiled. Almighty cultivators sought transcendence and were usually unwilling to be restrained. However, if they were to encounter a life-and-death situation, they would not care so much. After all, their lives were more important. Thus, this technique was still somewhat useful. In fact, it would not be an exaggeration to say that it was a life-saving treasure. If it was not for the fact that he could use his Dharma power easily, he might have seriously considered it. However, for the lower-level cultivators, this was a shortcut to join the Green Jade Palace. Looking at the situation, the Green Jade Palace did not recruit indiscriminately. If one's cultivation had not reached a certain level, one would not even be able to catch their eye. Apart from this, as Renji had reported, the easiest way to earn karma points was to go to the ruined lands. Green Jade Palace seemed to encourage cultivators to go there, so even those who had just arrived in Qinghua Heaven could use the formation door to go there. Zhang Yan read through everything recorded in the Jade Scroll one by one. His thoughts changed. Going to the ruined lands next was indeed a good choice. At the very least, he wouldn't have to stay in this place any longer. However, there were many ruined lands, and some of them were unusually dangerous. There was no detailed mention of them. After thinking for a while, he put down the Jade Scroll and asked, "Chu Peng, you have traveled with Immortal Ruan. Are you familiar with the ruined lands?" Chu Peng replied, "Master, the old master did not like fighting in Qinghua Heaven. He did not stay here for long, so my knowledge is limited. I only know that chaotic stars, floating ticks, and Xinghao are extremely vast and have countless demons. But after thousands of years, I do not know what they look like now. I only heard from the altar of Qi that these 3 places still exist and have not been conquered by cultivators." Zhang Yan nodded slightly. He had heard about these 3 places when he was in Tambua sect. For example, the branch of Immortal Sun Yu's Milky Lake sect had almost all the upper echelons in the ruined lands of chaotic stars. It was still unknown whether they were alive or dead. After all, they were of the same branch. If possible, he could go there to accumulate karma points and also find out their whereabouts. Thinking of this, he shook his head. From this, he could see the short-sightedness of the Luo Mountain Monastery. They had always claimed to be the authentic one and had never cared about the side branches. They did not even care about those of the same branch that had fallen in the ruined lands. How could they be convinced by this? If they immediately sent people to rescue them after the incident, even if it was just for show, they would be able to win over some people's hearts. If they acknowledged that they were the authentic one, they could cook with a warm fire and constantly show their skills. But this person was not even willing to put on a show. He seemed to think that as long as he had the divine item, he did not need to care about anything else. It was no wonder that he was becoming estranged from those of the same branch. After weighing the pros and cons, he thought, "Then let's go to the ruined lands of chaotic stars first. When I have enough karma points, I will go to the Golden Hall of Imperial Edict to get the demon-demanding edict." After making up his mind, he ordered his subordinates to set up an altar outside according to the method described in the Jade Talisman. He used his transcendence energy to write a talisman and burned it in front of the altar. Not long after, a golden light shone down from the sky. When the light dissipated, he saw another edict hanging above the altar. Zhang Yan reached out and took it. With this item, he would be able to go to the ruined lands without any obstructions. After looking at it carefully, he put it into his sleeve and returned to the Dharma boat. He used his transcendence energy and flew towards the nearest formation door. His forced flight this time used up several times more transcendence energy than usual. However, the journey was not long, so this bit of consumption was nothing to him. In just half a day he arrived at the peak of a high mountain. It could be seen that there was an altar with a circumference of more than 1,000 miles built here. A curtain of light hung down from the sky and passed through the thick layers of clouds. Its momentum was like a hanging waterfall, and it was as clear as the clear waves. He did not stop for long. Under the activation of his transcendence energy, the Dharma boat shook slightly. The brilliance in front of him shone and then disappeared. He knew that he had passed through the formation door. He looked up and saw that there was a vast land under his feet. However, there were broken rock pillars and collapsed palaces everywhere. The altar below the Dharma boat was still intact. There were billions of floating stones in the sky. At this moment, they seemed to be pushed by gusts of clear air and floated in a certain direction. From time to time, a few of them would leave the Chi River and fall from the sky, smashing heavily onto the ground with a trail of fiery light. He could sense that the ruined lands of chaotic stars seemed to be here but not here. It was as if it was dragged here by force and had not completely integrated into the Qinghua heaven. According to the records, demons from other realms would constantly be born here. No one knew where they came from. Perhaps this was the reason. Since he had reached the destination, he slowly withdrew his transcendence energy and landed the skyscraping Dharma boat. Then he walked out. There were over 10 cultivators guarding the altar. When they saw the skyscraping Dharma boat coming over, they could tell that another powerful cultivator had arrived. They all came out from their cultivation grounds. One of them bowed and said, "I'm the altar master of this place, Ying Tao. May I ask why you're here, exalted sage?" Zhang Yan did not say anything. He gestured to Rin Ji, who was beside him, and said, "It's to earn karma points." Ying Tao thought for a while and said, "If that's the case, why don't you postpone your departure for a few days?" Zhang Yan said, "Why is that?" Ying Tao bowed again and said, "I received a message. In a few days, Fengming, Songshi, and other sects will come to kill demons. If you can take care of them, you'll be able to earn a lot of karma points." Zhang Yan nodded slightly. It was recorded in the Jade Scroll that taking care of lower-level cultivators was a relatively easy way to earn karma points. He said, "Then stay for a few more days." Ying Tao called out and a disciple came over with a golden book. After he took it, he handed it over respectfully and said, "This is karma points are limited. As long as you've accumulated a certain amount of karma points, you can be recorded in this book. At that time, you'll be rewarded by the Green Jade Palace. The higher your name is, the more rewards you'll receive." Zhang Yan's interest was immediately piqued. He took it and opened it to see that the first name on the list was Si Heng of the Observant Heaven. The second was Jing Yinshao of the Accumulative Victory Heaven. The third was Zhan Qianchang of the Crossing Heaven. In the Qinghua Heaven, karma points were almost equivalent to strength. Karma points could even be used to avoid disasters and perform heavenly techniques. The people at the top were definitely not easy to get along with. He had to be careful. He looked down one by one. When he flipped to the 12th name, he found a familiar name, He Xianyin of the Heaven of Xianhong. He paused for a moment and continued flipping. Ying Tao said, "Those who can be ranked at the top are almost all mighty people. However, it's not difficult to be ranked at the top of the list for the venerables of Shangzhen." Zhang Yan smiled and put the golden book away. He asked, "How long has altar leader Ying been guarding this altar?" Ying Tao sighed. "I was sent here ever since I cultivated the cave. It's been more than 1,200 years. If there's no one to replace me, I'll have to wait another 300 years before I can be relieved of this responsibility." Zhang Yan asked, 8,000 years ago, there were cultivators from the Milky Way sect who came here. Altar leader Ying, do you know about it?" Ying Tao thought for a moment and said, "There was such a thing. At that time, sect leader Gua of the Milky Way sect, Shangzhen, and 6 enlightened masters went to the depths of the ruined lands. There were 3 other sects who went with them. However, they seem to have fallen into the turbulent space vortex and there's no news of them since." Zhang Yan asked again, "Does altar leader Ying know where those sects fell?" Ying Tao smiled bitterly. The turbulent space vortex is erratic. It appears and disappears from time to time. It's hard for me to know where it is. However, I do know that there's a golden enlightened master who has a map of evil views. There are many strange and dangerous places that have been explored by the predecessors. Perhaps it'll be useful to Shangzhen. Chapter 1528. After obtaining a lot of useful information from Ying Tao, Zhang Yan returned to the skyscraping Dharma boat and used a few days to refine a few talismans. Although he promised to protect those sects, with his current cultivation, it was impossible for him to do it himself. Bestowing a few talismans was enough to protect them. In reality, if it was another mortal metamorphosis cultivator doing this, they would at most send out a clone. It was just that he didn't have enough alchemy to move around. Clones also consumed a lot of transcendence energy, so he used a talisman that wasn't restricted to replace it. A few more days passed, and those sects all came. Hearing that they would receive the protection of a mighty person this time, they were all pleasantly surprised. The heads of each sect came to the Dharma boat to pay their respects. They received the talisman very solemnly and respectfully bowed and thanked him before leaving. After everyone left, Zhang Yan discovered to his surprise that the restriction on him had actually been loosened a little. He could already use some of his supernatural powers and transcendence energy. After thinking for a while, he guessed the reason behind it. Perhaps the karma points here didn't have to be completely completed to be obtained. As long as he had a good start, he would be able to obtain a portion of it. This was probably to make it easier for the cultivator to use the karma points better and thus stay longer in the ruined lands. However, this didn't mean that he was taking advantage of them. It wasn't hard to imagine that if those sects met with an accident, everything would return to how it was. As the saying goes, it's easy to obtain but difficult to give up. After receiving a portion of the karma points, the protector would probably not be able to completely ignore it. Most people would probably be more attentive than before. However, he didn't think too much about it. Not only did he pour a lot of transcendence energy into the few talismans he refined, he also left a drop of blood essence in them. If those sects were fine, the blood essence would naturally return to him. If they met with a powerful enemy, it would immediately transform into a blood chi barrier. As long as his own essence chi wasn't exhausted, it wouldn't be broken by others. Thus, this matter could be put aside. He circulated his magic energy slightly and noticed that there was no obstruction to flying now. Even though the consumption of magic energy was still greater than before, it was sufficient for him to bear it with his foundation. Thus, with a command in his heart, the sky-split arc instantly soared into the sky and flew towards the place Taoist Jin lived in seclusion according to Ying Tao. 2 days later, they arrived in front of a half-tilted mountain peak. The mountain was slender and slanted to one side, but it did not fall to the ground. Looking at it, it looked like a huge sword was stabbed into the ground. They knew that they had arrived at the boundary. Taoist Jin was originally the sect master of a sect, but something happened to him when he entered the ruined lands to hunt demons. In the end, he was the only one who managed to escape. Later, he went to the Green Jade Palace and swore an oath to explore all the ruined lands in Qinghua Heaven and draw them on a map for the cultivators of the heavens to hunt the demons. Because of this, not only was this person's magic energy not restrained at all, he could even borrow it to use many destructive methods. When he traveled in the ruined lands, even the great demons and evil spirits did not dare to provoke him. Zhang Yan came out of the sky-split arc and bowed outside, saying, "Taoist Jin, are you here?" "I, Zhang Yan, I have come to visit." After a short while, a brilliant light appeared like red after the rain. Then, a middle-aged cultivator in a beautiful mountain and river robe came out riding on the light with his sleeves fluttering. This person's hair was already white, but his eyes were clear, like a child who was ignorant of the world. Zhang Yan sensed for a while and found that the other's chi dynamic was only ordinary. He had not cut off his past body. According to Ying Tao, this person had already transformed into a mortal thousands of years ago. This meant that karma points could not directly increase one's magic energy, and could only be used as external objects like talismans and talismans. The middle-aged cultivator walked to the front, looked at him, and returned the greeting. He said, "Altar Master Ing sent me a letter a few days ago, saying that Shang Zhang is here to ask for a portrait of evil?" Zhang Yan replied, "Yes, do you have one?" Taoist Jin said, "I do have one with me. I drew it for the convenience of my fellow Taoists. However, I have to ask something. I heard from altar leader Ing that fellow Taoist Zhang might be heading to the spatial turbulence." Zhang Yan did not hide it and said, "That's right. I have a fellow Taoist who has fallen there, and I intend to go there to search for him." Taoist Jin's eyes lit up and he said, "If fellow Taoist Zhang can really go to that place, can you make a portrait and bring it back for me?" Zhang Yan thought for a moment and nodded, "That's not difficult. I can agree." Taoist Jin's face lit up, and he took out a scroll from his pouch and pushed it over with his transcendence energy. He said, "This is the portrait of evil. Please take it, fellow Taoist." Zhang Yan took it, glanced at it, and put it into his sleeve. He said, "Thank you for the portrait, fellow Taoist. I won't forget what you've asked me to do." Taoist Jin cupped his hands at him and said, "Then I'll leave it to you, fellow Taoist." Zhang Yan returned the greeting and turned back to the skyscraping Dharma boat. When he sat down, he opened the portrait of evil and looked at it carefully. Not only did the map indicate the various dangerous places, but it also had detailed notes on where and who fell, when and what demons appeared, and roughly when it was safe. However, the chaotic star ruins were boundless, and only a small part of it had been explored. Some of the places were shrouded in chaotic evil chi, and few people dared to go there. Fortunately, what he had in front of him was enough. After looking at it, he put the map away. Just as he was about to leave, his heart trembled slightly. He saw a slender golden light shoot down from the sky. When it arrived in front of the boat, it turned into a golden shuttle and hovered there motionlessly. His eyes narrowed slightly. He recognized that this was the shadow-transmitting flying shuttle from Yu Huan's All Heavens. After pondering for a moment, he reached out and grabbed it. Then he tossed it down. A curtain of light immediately spread out, and the figure of a cultivator with golden runes on his face appeared. This person had a head of red hair that was scattered behind his back, and he looked wild and unruly. This person cupped his hands and said, "Is this Zhang Shangzhen?" Zhang Yan glanced at him and said, "Yes, I am. Who are you, sir?" The cultivator straightened his body and said proudly, "I am the guardian of Hua and Tianxing Great Monastery. My surname is Wu, and my name is Yang. I heard that Shangzhen Zhang has come to the chaotic star ruins, so I came here to meet you." Zhang Yan nodded and said, "So it's Elder Wu. May I ask why you are here?" Wu Yang's eyes shone brightly and he said, "I heard in the sect that Shangzhen Zhang is the true owner of the divine object left behind by the great underworld patriarch. This object is extremely important to our sect, so I have a presumptuous request. I wonder if you are willing to part with it?" At this point, his tone changed and he said, "Of course, I don't expect you to agree to it right now. As long as you are interested in it in the future, you can think of us first." Zhang Yan said indifferently, "There's no need to think about it. How can I let someone else have a gift from the patriarch?" Wu Yang chuckled and he said, "Why don't you try to be flexible? After you obtain the divine object, you can lend it to me. That way, you won't be going against the patriarch's words, right?" Zhang Yan smiled faintly, and he didn't say anything else to this person. With a wave of his sleeve, a clear stream of air sprayed out, and the ball of light immediately scattered. He was already prepared for this. After the outside world found out that he was the owner of the divine object, there would definitely be people coming to him. If the palace lord of Green Jade Palace personally came to ask for it, perhaps he would consider it. After all, no matter how powerful one was, one couldn't defeat a true young grand cultivator. However, if that was really the case, he could go back and find a way to set up an altar to worship the patriarch. He believed that the patriarch would come to deal with this matter. As for the others, he didn't need to care about them at all. However, this person spoke so straightforwardly without any concealment, so he was probably just here to scout the way, and his identity might not even be true. Looks like it's just as I thought. There are really many people in the Yuhuan heavens who are eyeing the divine object. Thinking of this, he once again took out the karma points ledger and looked at all the people who were ranked one by one. Ordinary people might only stare at the rankings, but in his eyes he could see many things that were worth pondering over. Combined with the information he knew, the higher the ranking of the cultivators, the closer the world they came from was to the clear sky, and vice versa. In the 19 heavens, there were only 3 worlds where cultivators frequently appeared. They all had a deep relationship with Green Jade Palace, while people from the other worlds rarely appeared or were not recorded at all. He didn't find it strange. After understanding the details of Green Jade Heaven, he understood that it was all because of the good deeds system. In Green Jade Heaven, the number of good deeds could directly determine a person's status, but in the outside world, no one would care about this book. This was because this was not a battle ranking, but a good deeds ranking. For example, Si Heng, who was ranked first, might not be He Xianin's match. However, it had to be noted that when the good deeds system was no longer limited to Green Jade Heaven, but included the entire Yuhuan heavens, the situation would truly be reversed. At that time, the good deeds ranking would directly determine the strength of the cultivators in the heavens. If that really happened, all the rules in the Yuhuan heavens would probably be at the mercy of Green Jade Palace. Moreover, there was another truly terrifying thing about the good deed system. That was why it bypassed all human relationships, the inheritance of master and disciple, and even mortals could use it to exchange for external medicine. Previously, Renji had learned from the mortal caravan that in Green Jade Heaven, if 1,000 large clans did their best, they could support a chi refinement cultivator. Although they could only open their meridians at most, they would break through the barrier between immortals and mortals, and there would be countless possibilities in the future. Moreover, good deeds could also be used to borrow divine abilities, magical treasures, and talismans. Logically speaking, as long as there were enough good deeds, even if a cultivator with no talent didn't cultivate diligently, as long as he obtained enough good deeds, he would still be able to possess extraordinary battle prowess. Under such circumstances, the difference in talent between cultivators was negligible. Logically speaking, under this system, after 1,000,000 years, countless cultivators should have appeared in the Qinghua heaven, but in reality, this was not the case. This was because there were demons invading the outer realm from time to time, and at every moment, there were cultivators fighting to the death with them. It was not only the Qinghua heaven, but also the cultivators of the other heavens. From the bad deeds, it could be seen that the cultivators of the heavens were very resistant to this system. However, no matter how much they disliked this method, they had to come, because the temptation was not small. For example, the top 15 could directly enter Green Jade Palace to listen to the teachings, and could even ask the disciples of Green Jade Palace to help protect the Heavenly Lord from the calamity. It was not difficult to imagine that in the future, Green Jade Palace would definitely expand the scope of the good deeds system, and the other side would definitely do everything possible to stop it. Zhang Yan put down the bad deeds book, and his eyes became darker. He could naturally see that the strength of the two sides was actually not equal, because Green Jade Palace had a mighty person of true yang, and if there were no changes, they would win one day. If they wanted to change the situation, they would need another person of true yang to come forward to fight, but it was extremely difficult to cultivate to this realm. Now, it seemed that the only possibility was the dark stone left by Tai Ming Patriarch. Chapter 1529. Zhang Yan pondered for a while and realized that although there were no ripples on the surface, there was a turbulent undercurrent underneath. For example, taking Zhu Rong as an example, he and his junior brothers had been asked to kill many cultivators in the past. However, if one were to pay attention, one would realize that many of them were from sects that were slightly inclined towards Green Jade Palace. There were also some who were not, but the number was relatively small. This was interesting. He guessed that Zhu Rong was probably a chess piece thrown out by one of the parties to participate in the battle. If this speculation was true, The person behind Zhu Rong would definitely not give up on the divine item left behind by the great underworld patriarch. However, he was not afraid. If this person dared to come again, he would just kill him with his sword. Next, he could try to get in touch with the forces that were on good terms with Green Jade Palace. Based on the current situation, he did not seem to have any conflict with them. Instead, they were enemies. However, he knew that he could try to get close to them, but he could not trust them. This was because even if the Green Jade Palace wanted to stop the other party from obtaining the divine item, it did not mean that they did not covet it. In reality, he could not trust anyone here. He could only rely on himself. If he was powerful enough, no one would care about him. Fortunately, there were still 1,000 years before the time limit of the Dark Stone. He could still make good use of this time to plan. With his current strength, no one could pose a threat to him under normal circumstances, unless a Heaven Master came personally. However, this place was not completely foolproof. For example, in the Qinghua Heaven, what determined everything was karma points, followed by one's own cultivation. Therefore, if these people wanted to make a move, this seemed to be a good opportunity. He sneered. If that was really the case, he would just have to wait and see. He tapped on the cardinal with his rise finger and channeled his mana into it. The magic boat shook and soared into the sky, heading in a certain direction. Just now, after traveling for more than 10,000 miles, there were billowing demon clouds drifting over in the distant sky. It could be seen that the clouds were formed by countless ferocious monsters. Its lower body was a ball of mist, and its upper body had the head of a bull and the claws of a lion. This creature was called a Bai Ho, and it was one of the most commonly seen ferocious creatures in the chaotic sky ruins. It was known for its ferocity, and as long as it sensed the presence of the enemy, it would charge forward like a moth flying into a flame, regardless of how strong the enemy was. Because there were too many of them, it was almost impossible to kill them all, so when cultivators saw them, they would usually avoid them. When Zhang Yan saw this, he didn't avoid it. He only said, "You too, step back a little." Rin Ji and Chu Pang hurriedly retreated. Rin Ji took out his defensive magic tool and firmly protected his mind. Usually, when Zhang Yan traveled outside, he would restrain his qi dynamic to avoid stirring up the spiritual vigor of heaven and earth. At this time, he no longer restrained himself and released it. In an instant, an unfathomable and extremely grand aura filled the space between heaven and earth, causing thunderous rumbles. The floating rocks in the sky instantly fell like rain. Those ferocious creatures were only affected by the aura, and they fell one by one, smashing large pits on the ground and turning into countless pieces of flesh and blood that were difficult to distinguish. With the might of a mortal metamorphosis cultivator, he didn't need to do anything at all. He could suppress these monsters with just his qi dynamic. In fact, even if they were released, they wouldn't be a threat to Zhang Yan at all. After cutting off the past, as long as their cultivation hadn't reached this realm, they wouldn't be able to hurt him. If it wasn't for the fact that his mana was still restricted by his karma points, with the speed of the sky-scraping dermic boat, he would be able to go over in an instant, and these ferocious creatures wouldn't be able to see him. However, at this moment, he seemed to have sensed something. He looked in a certain direction and was slightly surprised. There was actually a ferocious creature that had already reached the grotto heaven level. This was very rare. According to the records on the map, Bai Xiao had always relied on numbers. It was rare for such a big monster to appear. With a thought, a breeze swept over, and he brought it into the dermic boat. Then he released light from his eyes, trying to find out where its roots were. However, after looking for a moment, he realized that the past of this monster was a mess, as if someone had deliberately concealed it. He raised his eyebrows, and a few thoughts flashed through his mind in an instant. In the end, he didn't delve into it. With a flick of his sleeve, this ferocious creature turned into a cloud of filthy air and dissipated. After cleaning up the demonic cloud, the sky-scraping dermic boat continued forward. Another 7 or 8 days later, he suddenly saw clusters of pitch-black flames rising from the ground in front of him. These flames didn't look big from the sky, but even the smallest of them occupied a radius of a few miles. Outside the flames, he could see the ruins of dermic boats and palaces everywhere. For millions of years, countless cultivators had died here. This wasn't a good place. If these people didn't have their friends from the same faction to rescue them, even their souls wouldn't have been able to escape. When the Dermic boat got close, the flames suddenly trembled and became brighter. When Renji looked over, he saw figures struggling and wailing in the flames. Renji instantly felt restless, and his chest felt tight and restless, as if he couldn't help but roar out. He quickly circulated his cultivation technique, and just now, he calmed down. He asked in surprise, "Spiritual Master Chu, what's in the flames?" Chu Hao was a little confused. His two heads looked left and right and he said, "There's nothing in the flames?" Renji was startled and he asked, "Spiritual Master Chu, you didn't see it?" Zhang Yan smiled and said, "That's just the illusory flames in the heart. Those with stronger desires and obsessions will see it more clearly. Chu Hao's cultivation is deep, and his mind is calm and indifferent, so I didn't see it." Renji couldn't help but look ashamed. He bowed and said, "Disciple thought that I have some ability now, but it turns out that my cultivation is far from perfect." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "You don't have to belittle yourself. If a cultivator has no desires or desires, then he would have no desire to improve himself. The cultivation of the person behind this fire far surpasses yours, so you naturally can't resist it." Chu Hao looked down and said in surprise, "This fire is created by transcendence energy, but I can't sense any qi. If it wasn't for Master's reminder, I definitely wouldn't have noticed it." Zhang Yan explained, "This place is called the Sea of Fire, and it can be considered one of the most dangerous places in the ruins of scattered stars. A fierce monster hibernates at the bottom of the sea. It has a vicious and cunning temperament, and has been severely injured by cultivators who have come to slay it. However, it always manages to escape. Although the karma points gained from slaying this monster have increased, no one has ever succeeded in slaying it. In fact, although this monster was dangerous, it only stayed in this area and didn't go anywhere else. As long as outsiders didn't enter its territory, it wouldn't come out on its own. However, it was unlucky this time. The area it had marked just happened to block the path of the skyscraping spirit boat to the spatial turbulence, so it was ready to finish it off. Zhang Yan looked down for a moment, then put two fingers together and circulated his transcendence energy. Immediately, a talisman gathered at the tip of his finger, and a ring of 5-colored light rotated. After a few breaths, the light dimmed. He called Renji over and said, "Take this talisman and go down. If the monster appears, just throw the talisman out." Renji nodded and went down with the talisman, floating toward the Sea of Fire. Zhang Yan watched Renji's figure disappear into the distance. As long as this monster appeared, it would never be able to go back. He had once calculated that if he killed around 20 of this monster, he would be able to release all the restraints on his body. Just as he was planning to deal with the monster, in front of a formation door in the ruins of chaotic stars, rays of light bloomed, and 3 figures appeared one after another. One of them was as tall as a mountain, clad in golden armor and holding a large golden axe. It was Zhu Rong's junior brother, Jiang Ao. On the other hand, the other 2 had the same appearance. Their entire bodies were shrouded in a hazy mist, and there were no facial features on their faces. It wasn't that the 2 of them were deliberately trying to mystify others, but it was because they were purely clones. However, Jiang Ao didn't dare to underestimate them because of this. In terms of the cultivation of their real bodies, they were above him. Although it was only their clones, they could still use the divine sense and dharma treasures that they had exchanged for karma points. However, to prevent their real bodies from being damaged, they chose to do this. In reality, if a cultivator had enough karma points, they could even ask Green Jade Palace to directly create a karma skill body for them. This body could even use all the divine sense and Taoist arts that they had. However, until now, no one had done so. Firstly, it required too many karma points, and secondly, everyone had doubts about it. Even sects that were on good terms with Green Jade Palace didn't dare to try it rashly. At this moment, the altar master guarding the altar noticed the commotion and quickly came out to greet them. Jiang Ao sent him away with a few words, then took out a pearl and shook it towards the sky. After a while, a dazzling light shone from it. His eyes flashed, and he turned around and said, "Fellow Ing, fellow Bai, that Taoist Zhang really hasn't left. It's convenient for us to attack. However, this person is powerful, and even my senior brother can't take a punch from him. You two should be careful." One of them chuckled and said, "Fellow Jiang, there's no need to be afraid. If we were in the outside world, it wouldn't be easy to defeat this person. However, we're in Qinghua heaven. Now that we're here, how much strength does this person have left?" Another person also said, "That's right. Fighting here doesn't rely on one's own Weili, but karma points. This person isn't from our Yuhuan heavens, and he's just arrived in Qinghua heaven. How much accumulation can he have? With the three of us here, do we still have to be afraid of not being able to take him down?" Hearing their words, Jiang Ao seemed to agree on the surface, but he sighed in his heart. He thought that these words were too optimistic. How could that Taoist Zhang not know his own shortcomings? Perhaps he had already made some preparations. If they underestimated him, they would definitely suffer. However, it was not appropriate for him to speak up and persuade them. Although there were countless Yuhuan heavens, there were actually not many cultivators who could truly cultivate to the level of mortal metamorphosis. It was already good enough that he could find 2 people this time. For this, he had also paid a huge price. Not only did he use up all the favors he had in the past, he also used up almost all the good items he had accumulated for thousands of years. If these 2 people were displeased and did not put in any effort, he would be the one to suffer. Chapter 1530. As soon as Renji left the Skyslope magic vessel, he withdrew the talisman that Zhang Yan bestowed to him at the beginning, and after he unfolded it, a cool breeze lifted him up and carried him down. He carefully moved around the clumps of flames on the ground and gradually went deeper into the depths of the sea of flames. He was clearly aware that he was only playing the role of bait at this moment. But with the decree in his possession, so long as he grasped the right opportunity, it would be sufficient for him to defeat his enemies and obtain victory. However, on the way, he had to overcome the adverse effects brought by the flames. This thing constantly disturbed his mind, and it caused his chest to be extremely agitated. It was to the extent that he had to divide a portion of his energy to maintain his calm, and he was unable to place all his energy on guard against his enemies. At a time like this, his tenacity that far surpassed his peers revealed its benefits. Even though his chest was tight and he was short of breath, and the blood in his body was surging, he was still forcefully suppressed it with his supreme willpower. After a short period of an hour, he'd actually gradually adapted to this disturbance, and it became slightly easier for him to deal with it. But right at this moment, a loud rumble resounded in front of him. A part of the ground suddenly caved in, revealing a large hole. After that, an ochre-colored long beard stretched out from within and fiercely whipped towards him. Renji hurriedly dodged to the side, and the beard slapped onto the ground, causing the mound that lay there to be instantly cut off from the middle, causing an enormous ravine to appear on the ground. However, he saw an opportunity at this moment. He didn't have the time to exclaim in admiration at the might of the mountain collapsing and the earth splitting apart, and he seized the opportunity before the beard was lifted to leap into the ravine and flee downwards. However, after descending for over 3 kilometers, he suddenly noticed that there were countless tiny hairs fluttering around him. They seemed to be light like clouds, yet every single time they collided with the walls of the cave, they would scratch open numerous deep marks, and the hard rock was actually like rotten soil under their scratching. His heart shook. Perhaps these hairs alone were of no threat to him, but there were truly too many of them, and they absolutely couldn't be underestimated. Thus, he waved his hand and withdrew a protective magic treasure. But as he continued to go deeper, the treasure light around him gradually dimmed as it was being worn down at every moment. It was obvious that he wouldn't be able to last much longer. One had to know that he couldn't use any divine arts or Dao techniques at the moment and could only rely on the talisman's instrument to move around. This was the only protective talisman he could use. If this continued, he might die before he reached the end of the journey. However, his gaze was firm and he didn't waver at all. Not long after, there was only a thin layer of the treasure light left, but he still didn't stop. Just when the light was about to be extinguished, the scene before his eyes suddenly widened. He discovered that he had landed in a spacious cave that had been dug out, and all the hairs had been thrown behind him. When he looked down again, his eyes suddenly widened. There was a worm that was 3 kilometers long. There were dozens of eyes on its head, and its mouth was split open to its abdomen. There was a long tongue protruding out, and there were dozens of huge tentacles behind its tail. Just now, it was only one of them that had come out of the ground. It was hard to imagine what kind of scene it would be if these dozens of tentacles just now waved at the same time. While Renji sucked in a breath of cold air, he also understood that just now, this fierce monster probably only regarded him as an insect and only wanted to drive him away. In the monster's eyes, perhaps he was too weak and wasn't worth spending too much effort on, but perhaps it was because of this that he was able to smoothly reach this place. At this moment, although his mind was thinking, his hands did not slow down at all. He took out the talisman and then threw it down. In an instant, a 5-colored brilliance sprinkled in the cave. Only now did the long worm realize that the situation wasn't good. It twisted its fat body as if it wanted to drill deeper into the ground. However, before it could do this, the light had already descended and enveloped its body. In just a breath of time, its flesh and blood had transformed into steam, and in a few more breaths of time, it had completely vanished. At the moment when the monster disappeared, Zhang Yan felt a strange feeling. He took out the good deeds list and opened it. He found that he had entered the good deeds list, but his ranking was very low. Now, even some practitioners of the Heaven Grottos had obtained far more good deeds than him. Usually, when one entered the list for the first time, Green Jade Palace would reward him. He only needed to set up a magic altar to obtain good deeds. However, he took a look at the good deeds list. These things might have some value in the hands of the practitioners of the Heaven Grottos, but they were useless to him. Green Jade Palace did this to drive the practitioners to obtain more good deeds. As long as he could go back and forth in Qinghua Heaven without any hindrance, he would be able to use his divine sense and Taoist arts freely. There was a spiritual light in the hall. At this time, Renji turned back and went to the front of the stairs. He bowed and said, "Shinren, the fierce monster is dead." Although it was mainly because of the talisman that killed the fierce monster, he was the one who did it, so he obtained some good deeds. Now, he could fly outside without the talisman. Zhang Yan flicked his finger, and a spiritual light flew down and turned into a golden ring floating there. He said, "Your magic weapon has been damaged, so this is a gift for you." Renji accepted it happily and said, "Thank you, Jinren, for the gift." Zhang Yan said, "If you had not dared to rush into the crypt and attack, the fierce monster might not have died so easily. This is what you deserve." Renji bowed again. He understood that this was a test. If he didn't have the courage to do so, he would have turned back halfway. Although he might not have died, he wouldn't have received much attention. Thankfully, he didn't cower back. Now, not only did he obtain an excellent magical treasure, but after this experience, his state of mind was much more stable than before. The benefits he gained could be said to be enormous. After Zhang Yan waved his sleeves and dismissed him, he looked at the good deeds list again. His eyes flashed. Since he could see the ranking, then the people who paid attention to it should also be able to see it. He wanted to see if those people could tolerate him obtaining good deeds here. As he expected, at this moment, on the other side, Jiang Ao also noticed the change in the good deeds list. With a serious expression, he said, "That Taoist Zhang has entered the good deeds list. We need to hurry." Taoist Ing said faintly, "I've already said that once we're here, we can just go straight to him. The longer we delay, the more magic power this person can recover, but fellow Taoist Jiang is unwilling." Jiang Ao frowned slightly. He did not go straight to him because he wanted to find out the purpose of Zhang Yan's visit. This was something that must be understood, or else it would not be beneficial for them to come down here. On the contrary, after knowing this, they could make corresponding arrangements. However, he did not refute. Instead, he skipped over this part and said directly, "This Taoist Zhang is going to the space turbulence to look for the cultivators of the same tribe who were lost in the past. The space turbulence is strange, and there are many demons inside. If we let this person go, he might come out unrestrained. I think we should do our best to stop this person before he comes out." Another Taoist Bai said, "Is this news reliable? Could it be that this person is deliberately trying to mislead us?" Jiang Ao said, "It should be true. That Taoist Zhang doesn't seem to have any intention of hiding his whereabouts. Moreover, after his senses are blocked, this person can't possibly know that we are going to look for him. Before coming here, he had already used his good deeds to ask the people of Green Jade Palace to use their transcendent artifacts to conceal this part of the heavenly mystery. Therefore, it was impossible for Zhang Yan to sense any warning signs." Taoist Ying said, "We are quite far away from him. I am afraid it will not be easy to catch up with him." Jiang Ao thought for a while and said, "It's fine. I can use the Light Pursuit Cloud Wings and catch up to this person before him." Light Pursuit Cloud Wings? Taoist Ying was a little surprised. She said, "Brother Jiang, you even have such a treasure? From what I know, no matter how many good deeds you have, you can't exchange for it. At most, you can only borrow it." Jiang Ao sighed. "As long as I can avenge senior brother Zhu Rong, this price is nothing." Taoist Ying and Taoist Bai looked at each other. They both knew that this was probably only the reason on the surface. However, they had no intention of thinking too much about what was going on behind the scenes. Taoist Bai said, "Then let's do it according to Brother Zhang's method." Jiang Ao stretched out his hand and took out 2 dazzling transcendent artifacts shaped like cicada wings from his pouch. He muttered a few words, and with a shake of the artifacts, they turned into golden threads that wrapped around the 3 of them. In a flash, they disappeared without a trace. When the 3 of them reappeared, they were already standing on a foreign land that was completely different from the one they were in just now. Jiang Ao took out a map from his pouch and compared it with the map. He said, "If there is no mistake, we are already ahead of that Taoist Zhang. This is the path he must pass to get to the spatial turbulence." As he spoke, a dazzling light flew up from his body and disappeared into the sky in an instant. Taoist Ying looked up and sighed inwardly. "This chasing light cloud wing fruit is a flying treasure. If I could get my hands on it, I would be able to roam freely in the remnant heavens. What a pity." He felt that Jiang Ao was being too impatient. This transcendent artifact could not only be used for traveling, but it could also be used for escaping. How good would it be if he kept it as a backup? How could Jiang Ao not know that it would be better to keep it? However, this time, he was going all out and did not even consider leaving a way out for himself. He waved the map and said in a deep voice, "From the map, there are several great demons nearby. Maybe we can make use of them." Taoist Bai's heart was moved. He said, "Brother Jiang wants to make use of them?" Jiang Ao said, "Since this person wants to obtain good deeds, he won't let go of the demons along the way. If we lure these demons over and wait for him to fight with them, then we can kill our way out. That way, we will have a greater chance of success." Taoist Ying and Taoist Bai expressed their agreement. Even though they were full of confidence, they were still very cautious. It should be known that the person they were dealing with this time was someone who could kill Zhu Rong with a single punch. If the ambush failed, they would completely offend this person, which would bring them endless trouble in the future. Therefore, it was best to kill him here. Jiang Ao took out another vermilion red jade fruit and threw it into the ground. Not long after, a strange fragrance spread. He called out and retreated with Taoist Ying and Taoist Bai. Not long after, they heard roars coming from afar. He said, "It's done. Come down, we only need to wait patiently for that Taoist Zhang to arrive." You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.